compared to Japanese average salary, let's say low. It's about $2,000 for a
Yeah,
month.
I think
に
20万から25万ぐらい。
ah
Three 200,000 to 250,000 yen per month. That is their starting salary. And the Japanese are not complaining, to be honest.
oh.
They are just happy that they get a nice job.
So yeah, but like I say, it promised for 16 months for a year, and that's the basic. So that's the starting. And yes, I saw some comments says it's high compared to other companies in Japan, and where made other companies harder to recruit the talent there.
I wonder how long it'll take before a company takes the human incubators that China developed and just starts making their own humans because they need employees. They're like, we're going to do it ourselves.
In the Tesla Gigafactory, there were those huge robots functioning very quietly, very expeditiously, perfectly, without failing. Perhaps that's the future. I don't think these future-related advancements are needing any human incubation. I think robots are taking over all the manufacturing job and so many others. Even at the airport, there is uh, a long line in front of the screen where you just enter everything instead of going to the counter and talking to a human. And that poses a problem in my mind because all these uh, jobs that were uh, performed by humans before, what are these people going to do now?
Grow food.
Feed yourself.
Grow their own food. They're going to do what humans did for centuries, if not millennia, which is go get their own fucking food and cook it and eat it.
And make more babies so that your offspring can help you grow more food.
But don't you need land for that, Tyler? Not
You know what it
everyone.
is? This is
Yeah.
like this is precisely the domesticated cat asking, "What are us cats going to do when the owners aren't here to feed us?" That's precisely the panic that you hear because
But Aaron makes a great point. The
I
tigers have already taken most of the area, so where
Yeah.
do the
The
cats
land.
feast?
The land
Hi.
is not owned by people, and if you yesterday I was reading a report how many
uh,
percent
that's
of
bullshit.
land
Get
is
in an
owned by
airplane and fly
humans.
anywhere.
High
The,
density agriculture only takes 100 meters squared or 1,000 square meters to grow enough food to feed one person. If you look up what the Russians did with the dachas, you can actually see a very precise estimate of exactly how much it takes. And not as an estimate, but an actual practice. We use very inefficient forms of agriculture because the products are easy to ship long ranges. There's a lot of aspects to that, but we don't grow food necessarily. We don't use agriculture necessarily for food. We use it for cash crops and feeding cattle, and it's very, very inefficient. I think kind of by design, but that's a separate thing.
And glue. Let's not forget it helps us make glue.
I think that's a happy accident byproduct. Um,
Yeah, but it's only 100 meters squared to feed a person. If you actually run those numbers and how many areas, and you can greenhouse and guarantee they'll grow anywhere.
yeah, what it
Um,
is it will be difficult to do that in inner cities. That is true. But
actually, even that one, I've run those numbers too, and I've
well,
essentially we have
I'm
in
talking
places like
relatively. I'm talking. What I'm trying to address is Aram's point is not uniquely Aram's. It's held by everyone who was born in an inner city and never lived outside of an inner city, but they can't imagine life outside of an inner city. And
vertical
yeah,
rooftop
Or
gardens
do
essentially I can
not
do the
have
yield.
the privilege to do so. There's that also for inner
but
city.
the people living feeding themselves say that you're the privileged one. It's not the people living outside of the city growing their own foods aren't the privileged ones. You're the privileged one in the inner city. You're so
It's
privileged that you can't even feed your fucking self.
a hard
I agree.
story to sell. It's like imagine if Luke Skywalker didn't become a Jedi and instead stayed a farmer. It's a hard vision to sell.
Hydroponics doesn't seem that difficult to do.
It's not, nor is it. It's incredibly
No, it's
simple.
not. And it will improve
Easier
the
than
health
cutting a
as
dead.
well. When you eat the plant and fresh fruits, it reduces your chronic illness and the potential to get sick.
Oh,
So it's a win-win situation.
The
I'm with.
only people I hear promoting farming are Tyler and Dave Chappelle. So this is like a very
Oh,
rare thing.
my gosh.
But Tyler, before farming, you have to ask those people who lives in the city or who has been eating out or ordering food whether they know how to cook.
Yes, cooking is a problem, even with the people I work with. And this idea of cooking your own meals is very, very unsettling to them because they are like, we don't have time. And I'm like, you stand in the line for this much time every day to get your whatever food or you order it. Same time you can allocate during the weekend meal prep, and there are ways to go around it. It's just the mindset shift.
I'm you're kind of forcing the idea upon me that we need summer camps for humans to learn how to overcome these anxieties, and
Yes.
whether they be for kids or teenagers, and you send it's a boarding school.
You don't have to do
No,
that.
online.
Even in
Read
public
online.
school,
You don't have
in
to.
public school, we started a community garden in public school. So the children right now are growing cucumbers and zucchinis, and look at the smile on their face when they take the cucumber, take a bite, because they are like, oh, I grew this and I'm eating it. And that's the first time they realize that they can grow their food. It's just
on,
astonishing.
on that,
You know?
essentially the programs are extremely effective. That's actually something interesting, that when you look at community school gardens and such, like, who would be opposed to such a policy? Well, the agriculture lobbies and the people that provide the school with essentially, like, 5-10 year food contracts for the cafe are the ones that actually are unhappy. They also don't like the idea of kids being able to learn how to grow their own stuff, because then they start saying, mommy, why are we mowing the lawn, can't we plant that? The thing is
Mhm.
that when you actually look at historically, as an example, in victory gardens, it was expected as a patriotic duty that people would plant their own food, so that it didn't have to be a burden on wartime rations. What's interesting is immediately after the war, there was a massive marketing campaign by the agriculture lobby to say, "Oh yeah, the war's over. Why would you want to grow your own food? Don't do that." But when you actually look at the when you actually do the community school lunches and to switch those over to essentially say, "Hey, kids should learn how to grow their own food, garden stuff," you'll find that the people that are currently tasked with growing that food and selling it to you are actually some of the largest opponents of these types of programs. But it could be fixed relatively quickly. It's just we have to pretend that there's scarcity in order to keep certain votes in place.
I once suggested to a friend that it'd be great if kids could grow gourds in a garden, and then take those gourds and turn them into rattles, and then have a concert where they all play the rattles that were made with the gourds that they grew from a seed in a garden. And her mother was a teacher, and the teacher actually did this. And in fact, in the concert, there were other instruments, but they were all had to be made out of something that you grew yourself from a seed. And so that really happened. Apparently, the kids loved it, and so it not only involved eating what they grew from the garden, but also making music as well.
And
Well, it's
by the
interesting
way,
that Chris.
good news is you can easily find YouTube tutorials to teach you how to cook and bake and grow some simple food, I guess.
How about this though? You know how what are those rooms that people get? It's like a crazy thing that board house couples do on weekends, where they go to do they call them panic rooms or lock rooms, or you go into a room and you have to figure out how to get out of it.
Escape rooms.
Escape room.
Escape room.
Yes,
Yes.
thank you. So this concept has taken root in many places where people have run out of things to do. Right? It's
They
not
were
the kind
really
of
fun in pre-COVID, before the idea of being locked in a room with 4 or 5 strangers was appealing. You know.
well, that's the extra horror edition, the COVID version of the escape room. It adds a whole new dimension to the experience. But anyway, now that COVID's over, I assure you that those will be coming back as people, you know, are bored to tears and lack creativity with how to entertain themselves. So, what I'm
Oh,
what I'm imagining is, in the same way that people find that entertaining in that you might learn a new skill or challenge yourself. It's a challenge, it's physical, it's interactive. What about a similar variation where you are put in on a deserted island and forced to, or driven out into the boonies of whatever town you're in? You live in St.
Or
Louis.
Montana.
Yeah, you're driven an hour outside of central whatever town you're in, beyond the radio towers, and onto somebody's remote farm, and you have to learn very rapidly how to you know survive in survival camp.
The Chinese did this. It didn't end very well for them when they did their Great Leap Forward. Oh, they
Take
literally
their
had all the
own
people go
country
out from
road.
the cities. They let's
You know,
go try to farm.
we took cooking in eighth grade, and everybody
Home ec.
learned how to.
They
What?
canceled
That
those classes.
yeah,
Yeah,
Yes.
that's irresponsible.
I
Children
was
should
going
not be
to
learning
mention that.
anything.
They used to teach
that's
us both
just
cooking,
unbelievable.
Sure, it's one of those
ceramics.
practical
Do
classes.
you
That's what
remember
needs to be
that,
removed from
Dr.
the curriculum.
Francine?
Home
But all
economics.
Americans know how to do barbecue, right?
Yes, that's what it was called, home economics.
Yeah, home ec.
Well,
Yeah.
some of
Yeah.
That's
them know how to
right,
do it well.
exactly that.
Yes,
Okay.
my mom did home economics. That's where she learned how to cook and do basic other things. And she used to tell me that if I
You
could
learned to cook and sew. That
sew
was
household stuff as well and
and
sustenance things,
and now you
then
learn
I
how to
do
download
have.
Deliveroo.
And order Uber Eats.
And grab food.
Okay, everybody,
Or Uber Eats.
whip out your phone here. Today we're going to learn a very important lesson. Who
Really?
wants
Where our food comes from.
tacos? We're going to learn where food comes from, everybody. Okay.
Comes from a guy named Greg.
So we used to take field trips in my school in Manhattan 10 years later, and this was field trips to plant, to grow, and to learn about soils. This was in PS9 in Manhattan. 10 years later, that program was discontinued. Ceramics was discontinued, and home economics was discontinued. And it was right in line with the Reagan administration. Okay, I'm dating myself. There I go.
Well, let's not name names. Okay, so
Yes.
let's
So,
get,
Tyler, it doesn't
yes.
have to be that stressful. You can make a trip to farmers market every weekend and just talk to them. You know, my farmer market lady told me how she takes care of her hens and feed them just watermelon, spinach, and stuff, and that's why her uh, hens' eggs are colored. And it's not a big problem when you just spend some time. It doesn't have to be a drastic change. Over a period of time, you can shift. It's not that difficult.
Yeah, here we go. Okay, any other burning non-tech news before I sound the air horn and we get into the top tech stories of today? Going once, going twice. Here we go. Okay. Here are your big boring tech headlines for Thursday, June 3rd. Sorry, June 9th. Top story today is that Microsoft partners with Samsung to launch its Xbox TV app on June 30th, letting Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscribers play Xbox games without a console. And that's the future right there. And it's the battle of it has similarities to the whole Netflix versus Disney uh, battle, where Sony versus Microsoft for the future, and Google to a degree for the future of gaming platforms. Because why are they so focused on this? Because they know that in some way they might end up playing very significant roles in the metaverse, because these games are, more than anything else out there, precursors to metaverse platforms, essentially, that won't require the game consoles. They'll start
What do we
working.
do after we've automated everything? They think they have an answer.
Sure. Well, you either become a farmer or a full time cyber farmer uh,
Farming Bitcoin in the future.
in the metaverse. You can. Some of us will be farming in the metaverse. Some of us will be farming in real life, and there'll be robots from the real farmers to the cyber farmers. Um, so the next story is that there's two daughter articles to that. First one, that Microsoft details Project Microsoft, designed to bring early game demos to Xbox Game Pass, rolling out within the next year with a focus on indie developers, and hands-on with Xbox TV for Samsung 2022 TVs. Games load quickly and work with Xbox and PS5 controllers, etc., etc., etc. So, yeah, it makes sense because Samsung's not doesn't have a horse in that race, but now they're partnering up with one of the big horses, and everyone else will too. So Microsoft and Sony are going to be battling with, I don't know, Google ostensibly, and a few other players to see who can lock up all of the screens in your life. And make no mistake, there's going to be a few VR, MR, XR, AR devices that allow you to experience the games in the metaverse of the future. And those device companies are going to be, not well, Facebook's made that abundantly clear. Microsoft was doing okay with that until yesterday, until the leader of the HoloLens just got pushed out. And so their future is now a little uncertain.
And
Apple,
failing to get the layer face that military contract for Microsoft. I mean, I feel almost bad for them. That's like what, like 10, 20 billion or so they sunk
20
into
billion.
that, and the one client that could have paid it off just that maybe agile development. We want something a little bit more than that. I mean, it was pretty sad seeing their layer face of that tech demo stuff. It was not what those promised.
Apple was expected by many people to announce their ambitions this week, on Monday and Tuesday, Wednesday.
If they're running joke, they've done it literally. It's like maybe this time they'll announce the glasses. They've been doing this for 4 or 5
Yeah,
years now.
they sure have, and
Robert
I
Scoble
think they
cried.
might not. They're trying to make them look beautiful, and that's the problem. You know, Apple has that big design ethos, and so they can't just put them out there. They have to put them out there and have everyone think that even though they're more expensive and may not even work as well, they're really beautiful.
Apple, resistance is futile, but it has to look great.
It's easier to use as well.
Well,
If the Borg had like nice six sleek lines on the side of Star Trek instead of having like things falling off their face, it's just going to be like, yes, beautiful curves.
it would be interesting to see how many people purchased Oculus's, after the Apple keynote, which kind of ended anybody's fears that, they were going to have to wait for the Apple device to come out this year.
Well, you see the
Yeah,
design
but
cues. Oculus really took heavily after Apple. They have like the white surfaces and the flat kind of things. Like they did a very different way from Vive, which did styling in another direction. And you see who's winning.
Anyway,
yeah,
but
but if you were,
the bigger point I want to make sure we connect on is that, in addition to the screens on your faces, whatever you want to call that format, face phones or
Ah,
whatever,
damn it.
yeah, um, the traditional screens like widescreen TVs and your desktop and your laptop. I mean, you're going to experience some version of the metaverse through traditional screens as well. And that's why it makes sense for the traditional screen players like Samsung to partner with these metaverse ish players like Microsoft through their gaming consoles and Sony through their gaming consoles. And let's see what Unity and Epic does with their Unreal engines. But a lot of the important moves that are going to pave the golden brick road of the metaverse are being laid now, in ways that are not obvious to the general public. But these articles point to that, this Microsoft Samsung partnership.
I have a Luddite idea that if we're literally just trying to say, look, the world is in 2D, we're going to make it in 3D. The thing is, that sounds cheesy because that clearly happens about every 5 or 6 years since like the 70s or so, or the 80s, and that doesn't have the marketing hype. But the ones that are actually successful, the ones that actually take over, not essentially the ones that are aspirational. But if you look at Minecraft, Roblox, Fortnite, etc., that's really all they are. It's just the fact that they are doing the same things you do in 2 dimensions. They're just doing it in 3 dimensions, and they figured out the UX to make it happen, and they made a social experience. The thing is that because we can clump every other thing into this as an investment category, that's what generates the hype cycles. But you're going to see the same ones actually be successful are just going to be the same system, same ones we got in 2D, just not in 3D.
Okay, next up is Bloomberg says they have sources that Meta, formerly known as Facebook, halts development of their $349 smartwatch, which included dual cameras, which had been in the works for 2 years and was planned to launch next year, and will now focus, Facebook alternatively, will focus on their wrist devices, which are not a watch, but no doubt will play a very significant role in the metaverse. That's almost likely the combination of the metaverse and additional data points they can use in their ad network and ad tracking.
One of the technical reasons
Yeah,
for that is actually really interesting. They have a wrist sensor that you can wear that it can sense hand position.
yeah,
You have muscles going up and down your the bottom part of your. It's actually tensioners essentially that's going inside your
tendons.
wrist. And yeah, the tendons. Yeah, what's really cool about that is that if you have precise positioning of that, you don't even necessarily need to know where your hands actively are. Just the fact that your brain is sending nerve signals to move those things. And what's really interesting about this is that it solves a little bit of a problem because hand tracking is challenging when you can't see the hands. The current hand tracking that's shipping in the Oculus and the is pretty good, honestly. It's not. It doesn't have to be fantastic. It just has to be good enough, and it's almost there. The problem is what happens when you move your hands to your sides or outside the field of range of view, and then there's nothing essentially to infer that. So what's really cool about when you start combining different types of sensors from like a wearable sensor to essentially a visible sensor for like vision to something that's a kinetic where you're actually touching things, by combining all these together, you can make a persistent user interface that can be adapted to the task, which is pretty exciting over the long term. I've got to try some of these sensors essentially from some Israeli companies that have more advanced ones. Get Mudra, you can actually buy those right now. Um, uh, Facebook essentially bought another group from Intel for this tech, but it's not. It's a limited version of basically brain computer interfaces, but it's like only just using the nerves on the end of your body, and it still technically interfaces with your nervous system. It works surprisingly well, and it's something that a lot of people haven't experienced. So I think that they're going to be very pleasantly surprised when they start playing with some of these technologies.
I think we are still far away from that kind of integration. You guys know I host human factor rooms with Dr. Garcia. So the research in space, in ISS, and in zero gravity situation is really clear in terms of how our eyes visually and the positioning system are interconnected with the auditory and inner ear vestibular system. So when you are in the zero gravity situation, your body's floating and that sense of up and down and right and left is lost. And that causes a lot of confusion in the brain. And there is a syndrome that these astronauts go through in the first few days before getting adjusted. And they have to rely upon so many gauges, so many indicators on the suits that they are wearing. And it's not as easy as all at all. And if you look at these suits, even the modified one, the new one that they just came out with very improved system to indicate this disbalance and to integrate that disbalance is not perfect yet. So if NASA and these new suits that are made by another company and even SpaceX is working on this technology for a long time, they were just able to make this glove that would imitate and help with the movement of the fingers without injury potential, because the EVA, the extravehicular activity they perform, greatly depends on precise finger movements and balancing. And I'm telling you, it's not easy at all. That disorientation that you get if you're not visually connecting the signals with the sensory system in your body, you cannot like really tell what you are doing. I'll say it's still far.
Yeah, yeah.
I've worked with these systems. They work. I mean, like literally within 10 seconds of putting a device on, I was able to essentially manipulate 3D objects and move them around in the scene without moving my body, without moving my hands or positions. It was just thinking about it. The technicians there said it normally takes about 2 to 3 minutes for people, so I was a little bit on the faster side. But you're correct that you need to
Yeah,
have a visual
yeah, but
tying
how
link.
long can you
But
sustain that? How
yeah,
long can
right,
you
right.
sustain
So,
that?
so what I'm saying is the visual link is important, but once you've been able to make that transition, your brain adapts very, very quickly. It's just that initial transition is important. So I'm acknowledging that point. I'm just saying that it's not a fundamental barrier. It's just essentially a transition point where you learn, where the part of the learning process, like learning to ride a bike.
NextMind VR had a commercial product, although they were recently acquired. So the technology had some merit because it connected the visual feedback information. For example, with a VR headset, it just clipped onto the back of your head within the framework of the VR headset and captured and correlated the activity from your environment in the world to what is happening in your brain. So you would do some calibration tests, like look over here, focus on the person standing over there, focus on their head, and these kinds of things. And weirdly enough, it didn't take a lot of computation to resolve these neural network mappings, which is the very surprising and impressive thing here.
By the way, I put a link in the chat for Get Moodrift. If someone has a few $100s and you want to play with some of this technology, it's works surprisingly well. Like, he just plugs in over Bluetooth, and it's like, hey, I've got a brain interface that can control things. It's, simple controls. You're only moving like, finger positions, but you can map those to 3D positions, and it doesn't take that long to learn how to use. And I'm impressed at how develop the technology or how mature it is for how little the adoption is. So it's a sweet spot for larger corporations like Microsoft or Facebook or other groups to put it into the larger public, because it's almost there and ready, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, I shared a link there for Virtual Reality Oasis, a YouTube channel that reviewed the NextMind VR headset for anyone who wants to take a look at that, the commercial product.
Okay, are we ready for the next one?
Yep.
Take it away.
Okay, here we go. Next up is Apple will handle, well, this is an update, an important detail that has been revealed about the Apple Pay that was shared during the Apple keynote that we all watched on Monday. And they showed a demonstration of iOS 16 where people are going to be able to pay each other with their phones through Apple Pay. So basically anyone can now accept credit cards. And the question is, who's handling that transaction? Because traditionally, Apple builds the hardware and a little bit the consumer-facing software, but the back end often gets handed down or delegated to some other third party. For example,
Didn't they sign a partnership with Goldman Sachs a little later
yes,
on, or didn't they sign another one?
The Apple credit card, which I actually have sitting in front of me here, now in my hands, is a partnership with both Goldman Sachs and MasterCard that allows for that card to happen. And actually, on the back of the card, it has the Goldman Sachs logo and the MasterCard logo.
But
And on the front,
for someone that actually holds the card, have you gotten it scratched yet, or do you use a special holder for it?
I never used the special holder for it. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Do you also not have a case on your phone?
I also don't have a case on my phone. That's true.
Ah.
So the interesting detail that has been revealed is that Apple will be handling the lending as a bank, and this is quite unconventional for Apple. As I said, normally Apple,
they have more money than most banks at this point. They can do that. They have a war chest.
Exactly right. So Apple has now this subsidiary called Apple Finance LLC that will oversee the credit checks and make the loan decisions. And that is the core of the Buy Now, Pay Later, BNPL.
Prediction, if the same thing happens to Ford, that happened to GM, that happens to all these other groups, once you start opening up your own bank and your own finance arm, it ends up swallowing the rest of the company, and it looks very impressive on paper, becomes one of the world's largest craziness. It just tends to degrade every other aspect of the company. So if Apple
Wow,
goes downhill after
that
this,
is
that's going to be
such
the
an
cause.
interesting that is such an interesting point because it takes more time, it takes more people, it's a completely different skill set, and it's very lucrative.
Yes,
Very.
and there's more. There's more to the story because essentially what Buy Now, Pay Later is an instant loan. If you think about it, you are able to purchase a device without actually having paid fully for it. You can pay 2 weeks later. You can pay 25% today, 25% 2 weeks later, 25% 4 weeks from now, and the final 25% 6 weeks from now. So they are
Yay, more
giving,
debt.
yeah, they're giving you a loan essentially to make it very simple. Now, different
And
people.
Tyler, if you've
Yes,
been an Apple customer for 25 years, they
yes.
already have all
There
that
you go.
information
There you
already.
go. Now the point is that Klarna, who popularized this whole phenomena of buy now, pay later out of Stockholm and grew to be a $50 billion company relatively quickly, was then copied by a firm, Max Levchin, former co-founder of PayPal in the US, who's been going rather gangbusters with it, where he partnered with Amazon to bring buy now, pay later to Amazon. And again, the key is, can you do a good risk assessment? Because you don't want to be, you have to calculate how much credit you're willing to give people. Will you allow people to buy $1 million worth of shit in a weekend? Probably not. You see where I'm going? You're probably going to have to calculate how much credit you're going to be issuing to people, how much debt, how many loans, and what overall size of loans you're willing to dole out to folks over what time frames. You need to be able to calculate that very accurately, or your business is going to fail. So I can tell you, being rather close friends with Klarna, even at the founder level, who, by the way, in full transparency, they are sponsors of my events and have been from the second month I ever did them 10 years ago. So when you make the payment through Klarna, they do a risk calculation based on you and a very surprising amount of data that they have about you. And the algorithm and the number of variables in that real-time calculation to make a risk assessment based on a risk profile, based on as many data points as they can possibly acquire about you. Right? Now, as Dr. Fran intuited, the Apple is in a position, more so than anybody, to have a whole lot of data points due to your device usage, particularly your smartphone, and the way that you engage with your apps and your payments and all of that jazz. They could be in a really good position, more so than anybody. The combination of their $200 billion in cash that allows them to give loans to everybody, and the data that they have to do the risk assessment, they're in a better position to do risk assessment than pretty much anybody for their users. So this is probably why they're willing to step up and turn this into a whole new arm of the company in a way that they normally wouldn't do. They would normally delegate these kinds of things out. And in fact, the code name for this internally at Apple tells you a bit about it, that internally this is a secret initiative called Breakout. So in addition to taking on the lending, the credit checks, and the decision making, Apple's working on its own payment processing engine that may eventually replace the MasterCard piece. So,
And this is going to fit well with its new ad network.
I think this is also
amen to that. I have
there's
one final point I just want to add before I hand it to you, Eric, which is the banks who sponsor my events, which would be Swedbank, Nordea, Danske Bank, all the Nordic banks. They all have they have many things in common. The one thing that they very vocally have in common when I have lunch meetings with them is their shared anxieties about Apple in particular going into banking. That is perhaps their biggest fear. And they've been predicting it for a very long time. They've been watching the tea leaves rather closely, and kudos to them. They're right. It's a matter of time. But Apple, if it decides to go into banking, and it looks like that day has arrived, boy, could Apple really shake some shit up in the consumer banking space. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I think also there's an interesting nuance here that people who take loans from Apple, they're not normal people. These are people who love Apple. This is the Apple way of life. So I also think their risk profile is going to be uniquely different because of that parameterization, because of the brand. So I think there's an interesting
Well,
correlation there that they're probably going to be able to leverage.
I got another one for you. If you were to use a firm, Max Levchin's company, right, or Klarna, and you don't pay your bill with Klarna, here comes week 6, you're supposed to make your 4th payment, and you say, you know what, fuck it, I'm not going to pay it. Okay, what is the actual recourse that a firm or Klarna has against you?
Well, the same as a bank. Everyone hates their bank, but
That's fine.
no one hates Apple.
But my point is this:
So
Apple has a unique ability to punish you in that they do not that their competitors do not have, which is throttling your device, your smartphone, or in worst case, turning off your fucking device.
Banished from the Garden of Eden. Boom. Just like that. Very biblical, Apple.
So can chew on that one when you think about Apple's unique position in being a creditor. No, your banks can make life hard for you. They can try and send a repo man to go get your car back. But in buy now, pay laters, you're buying all kinds of interesting gadgets, like a pooper scooper. I don't think they're going to send a repo man to come reclaim your pooper scooper. Apple doesn't need to send anybody to your house. They own your device, your laptop and your phone, your VR headset, eventually maybe your TV screen, your smart
Your
home.
memories.
Wait until Siri starts reminding you that you need to pay your loan back, or else. And you tell Siri, "Hey Siri, look this shit up for me on the web," and Siri says, "Yeah, right, you SOB. Well, how about you pay your loan back, and then we can talk about this crazy search you want to do for, Paris Hilton's height or whatever."
Oh, another scenario. Now people are working from home from their devices and using laptop. How about if you are not paying, you can't access even your work website and unless you pay. But I'm asking, legally, are they allowed to do such a thing?
Wait till it.
name
Hold on.
allowed.
Read the iOS 16 terms of conditions very closely before you install it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think working in data and privacy, I think that's how they'll get people, Tyler. What happens is they'll lay everything out very clearly, but to even someone like myself or many of us, we have no idea what the hell it's even saying. And it'll be pages long. I mean, when I worked at SiriusXM, when we used our in-vehicle virtual assistant, that was essentially, it was cool because you talk to it like a Siri or an Alexa, but it could have been collecting everything you were saying while you were in the car the entire time. But you sign your life away on that whenever you agree to use the service. So it's going to be the same thing, I think. You're going to just sign your life away on it.
This is a friendly
We're
reminder
very
that
used
you
to
have
doing
allowed
that.
spam.
We've been trained to do that. Since Yahoo, we've been trained not to read the terms of service. That's
Yep.
why for years, like 10 years, every terms of service of every company was cut and pasted from Yahoo's. It was only after about a decade that lawyers began to really write other terms of service.
Okay, next big topic is it says critiques of anti-crypto media personalities and the podcast circuit miss an essential point that most of Web3 currently sucks, and saying so is not a conspiracy. Read to the end of for a truly cursed TikTok. Web3 being not very good is not a conspiracy. And there's tweets from Shriram from A16Z saying one interesting vibe shift is the rise of the anti-crypto media personality, folks who do the podcast, press, TV circuit purely on their opposition to Web3, even when their day job has nothing to do with crypto in any sense. Yeah, you're starting to see vocal folks be vocally opposed to Web3 at the moment. Yes, there was a brilliant podcast recently with Mark Andreessen, along with Chris Dixon, who's both of whom are very pro Web3, and it was a very Web3 friendly podcast. And I'm sure you can find it. It's a week old or such. And the beautiful part of it is that Mark Andreessen draws a really interesting comparison to the early days of Web 1.0 and how all of the criticisms that were thrown at Web 1.0 he sees and he knows better than anybody. He pioneered Web 1.0 perhaps more than anybody. So he finds that this is just part of a bigger, broader cycle of um, doubt, that's being levied against Web3, and that he's seen this rodeo a few times, and he's very confident that it'll play out um, just as it did in Web 1 and Web 2, and that Web 3 will have its day eventually. That there was an intense exuberation, in recent months, and that bubble has popped. The exact same thing happened in '99 and 2000 with Web 1.0. There was a ridiculous amount of enthusiasm that popped, and there were a ton of people laughing during that popping. And there's a bunch of people laughing now that the Web3 bubble is going through a bit of a popping of sorts. But Mark's point fundamentally is that the geeks have a long held tendency to get overly exuberant about the future and how everything's going to change. And there's a lot of similarities between how the current frothy environment around Web3 and the environment in '99 and 2000.
And also the environment in 2005 with Web 2 when we held all those bar camps and we were really excited about Web 2.0.
Yeah,
I mean, there wasn't as big a frothy bubble,
right.
but everybody hated social media when it first started. Of course, they hate it now, but everybody's on it and hating it now. And then they weren't even on it. And that's the way it is with crypto and Web3. I'm totally lined up with Mark Andreessen in this perspective, although not a lot of others.
So then it's a great podcast. I think it's particularly beneficial for folks who um, are skeptical about Web3 and want to hear perhaps the most sober um, thoughts about why Web3 is so interesting without, in a kind of unvarnished way, in just a very sincere sort of way. So the next big topic is from the Washington Post that says they have sources that Twitter's board plans to comply with Elon Musk's demands for internal data on bots. And they came up with a clever way to deal with this by offering Elon access to the full, unfettered, quote-unquote, fire hose, as it's called, which means the full stream, which Twitter used to provide to some third parties, developers, and charge them for it, obviously. And they obviously that's a sort of big API. They can hand over some keys to somebody so that they can also have full access to all the tweets. That's the fire hose. So Elon's now going to get access to the fire hose so that he can figure out on his own accord and by his own means, uh, what's going on with the bots.
I can only imagine the size of the NDA for that.
Yeah, I'm also laughing.
Yeah, because he could capture an incredible amount of the fire hose and run all kinds of interesting queries on that. So let's see how that plays out. I
Does
guess
that mean Iran will have access to all the data?
no, it doesn't. It doesn't mean he has access to DMs or anything like that. It just means to the public data. That in theory, anyone, if you followed every account in Twitter, then essentially you would have that too, as a theoretical example. It's just all of the tweets.
Because
So,
according to his own words, I think it was a lot of the data that he was interested in Twitter, along with other things that align with his future plan of FSD and human and AI integration. So I was just wondering whether this is how he's trying to get to that data points.
yeah, that's the question: is what kind of scripts are he going to run to try and parse out the percentage of bots?
Cue awesome hacker music from Swordfish.
By the way, Cloudflare came up with a way to tokenize. They made an announcement today about tokenizing authentic visits. That would be a much more secure way to figure out who are authentic users rather than captchas. Far more effective than using captchas to determine who's a real user. And so let's see if Twitter could employ that, and that could really weed out the inauthentic accounts, aka bots, rather effectively. But let's see if they embrace it or not. But the solutions exist, and that's the newest, most it's not even 24 hours old, that announcement. But that's a very cool way to figure that out. So the next one is a daughter article that Bloomberg says, according to their sources, Twitter's Vijaya told staff in a meeting that a shareholder vote to approve Elon Musk buying the company will occur in late July or early August. So in about 2 months, there'll be according to Vijaya, who's the head of policy or privacy and safety. I forget what her official title is. The next big topic, Microsoft plans to stop adding non-compete clauses to U.S. employment agreements and drops NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, from U.S. worker settlements. Also adding salary ranges to top U.S. job posts and more. Bending to employee sentiment and legislative mandate, Microsoft announced a series of reforms Wednesday, which will curtail the kind of unionization efforts that are sort of underway there. It will curtail or end some of its most controversial workplace policies and practices. The company says it will no longer include non-competition clauses in its U.S. employment agreements and will remove these clauses from existing agreements. That's kind of bold. This applies to all employees except senior leaders. So that means you can much more easily be poached, by the way. And you can go ahead and start some competing product to Microsoft. You worked on the email team or the Outlook team, and now you can leave and go start an email startup of your own.
But Tyler, in tech, are they going to let them work from home? Because I'll tell you now, as a techie, a lot of my friends, they're leaving all these companies to go somewhere smaller, make as much money, and work from home, work on the beach, whatever the hell they want to do. So that's my question. Because are they one of the ones? I don't think they're one of the ones on board with that, right? All these big tech companies are making employees do hybrid or come back into the office. So they better get on board, or they're going to keep losing people.
I'm not aware of Microsoft's position on the back to office, work from home stance. The article doesn't reference it either, what their position is. It says that Microsoft will no longer include NDAs in settlement and separation agreements, so everything will be transparent in a separation or any kind of settlement, and the company will publicly disclose salary ranges in job posts in the U.S. starting January 2023. And Microsoft
Microsoft is still allowing people to work remotely, and I think that's the way that they want to keep it. Even before COVID, they were experimenting with the 4-day weeks on some teams, so they're going to probably continue with the hybrid for people who like it, and probably work remotely for people who don't. They did even allow that even before COVID, by the way, for people to work remotely.
Hmm. Mm-mm. Well, what the interesting implications in my mind is that it puts pressure on Microsoft's contemporaries to consider doing similar things.
Well, here's the thing. A lot of the people who work at Microsoft, and who are developers or something like that, they are in their offices, locked in their rooms. Nobody sees them. They don't want to see anybody. That's the way they like it, and they're left alone as long as they're, producing and writing that code that they're doing. They don't want to
That's
interact
me.
with anyone.
That's me too, but I still want to do it at home. I'll tell you right now. I don't want anybody
Yeah,
coming to
yeah,
my
yeah.
cube. I hide too.
And I'm sure you guys covered how Elon switched on this, topic and no longer accept the remote work, which was odd.
It's not odd from a Tesla perspective. Uh, I don't find that surprising at all. Knowing Elon a bit, I don't think it was ever an option for Tesla to be remote. In part because it's such a physical, hands-on type of operation. And there, Elon did one of his better tweets today, if I remember correctly, where the full self-driving beta is rolling out to a lot of Tesla owners, and somebody made the joke that the full self-driving beta will force Tesla employees to drive to work in the morning. And he can see he's replied by saying, "My diabolical plan is working perfectly," or something like that. That he's releasing kind
Well, I
of.
think Tesla also has a different kind of innovation cycle. I think they kind of mimic more what Asian companies are doing. So there's a lot of on the manufacturing floor innovation happening, and that's unlike other businesses. So, for example, Sandy Munro gave a breakdown of Elon's like car and how it was constructed. They redid that the way in which they construct a car. They reduced the number of parts and so on, and so it's very much hands-on. You only see the errors or the problems when things are happening there, so you have to be there. So it's kind of, even the software, an argument is you have to be there because the cars are there. Well, you're going to be test driving a Tesla at home, so it's not likely that, most of that work lends itself to remote.
If you're laying employees off to make trim the bottom line a little bit because you went on a little bit impulsive buying spree, or maybe not, of different large companies, and you need to trim a bunch of employees, but you don't want to place for unemployment benefits, etc. Well, if they leave on their own, not your problem. So if you make life slightly more painful for them and have them essentially, well, I don't know, have to commute to work, maybe essentially have other things kicking in, that's voluntary attrition. There you
Yes,
go.
Chris, you got it right.
Yep.
Yeah, but what are Tesla's margins, right? They're really, really small margins, so I'm not sure that
Yeah,
that lends itself.
trim that up by 10%. You got 10% more bottom line there. That's great.
Right, but that kind of attrition is not the attrition that you're seeking. Usually you will lose the good people in that kind of attrition. So
Of course.
good people let them stay, and bad people, low performers do the bad attrition. And by the way, when you make things harder, the good people will leave. The bad people will comply. So you're going to end up with a really interesting set of people there.
I'm not saying it's a good strategy. I'm just saying that if Tesla is so over leveraged that the idea of it going even slightly down for one quarter can wreck a complex a scheme that has all these interrelated companies and components, etc., and schedules, they cannot afford to have a down quarter. It goes very, very badly for them. So if they're willing to take essentially a cut to their labor, even though that's the thing that's delivering them their profits, that's going to be attractive as a quick little thing. It'll have consequences, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, this is a little known guy known as Bill Gates. Just has a small short on Tesla, so any sort of, I think, negative could spiral out of control.
Next topic. TikTok expands its screen time controls, adding a dashboard to monitor usage and letting users set time limits. Teens will get additional usage reminders. TikTok's
They'll
rolling out.
never know freedom, and they'll never get to do their own version. The state will take it in over the parents. It's just training kids for the world that they're about to inherit.
This is a reminder. Please use TikTok before your parents come home. Hurry, hurry.
With the change, the company is adding a new in-app dashboard that will more closely track how long people are spending in the app. The dashboard will show statistics like how much time you spend in the app. When you sue the app, I think they mean when you use the app most, not when you sue the app most. When you use the app most, and
That comes later.
and how often it's opened. Well, which state was it? So Texas or Florida is going to allow people to sue social media apps if their children are addicted.
Now if Oracle had bought out, if they've been forced to buy TikTok, which was one of the more bizarre things a few years back or whatever, that wouldn't work as well because Oracle is mostly made of lawyers. I mean, they've got a few engineers, they do a few products, but it's mostly lawyers. So imagining that the intense legal battles of like, no, you forced me addiction, you robbed me of my childhood, and all I got was some dance moves. I can see the court trials will be very entertaining in the future.
This was a great. This might be a genius preemptive move to avoid class action lawsuits 10 years from now when people say you intended to addict me, just like big tobacco. You
My
knew
dopamine levels are miscalibrated. Now I suddenly I can't wake up in the
I'm
daily
dopamine.
my daily
I have
cycle.
dopamine disorder, and you knew about it.
It's a
And
medical condition. It affects trillions of dollars of economic value, and these companies willingly profited off of it by I mean, the same stuff went for the tobacco. I mean, they could literally redo the same strategies.
Chris,
American,
you left out
America.
one thing. Chris, you left out one thing that now you're going to have companies sue them because they distracted their employees from working.
Oh, now it's going to get really colorful.
the changes come
I
as
like the idea
TikTok and its
of
fears have
dopamine
faced
disorder.
questions about the app's impact on teens. Earlier this year, lawmakers in the Senate introduced a bill that would increase the study of social media addiction. Notably, TikTok now says it's introducing additional screen time restrictions for teens, and teens will now. Well, by the way, maybe my half joke wasn't such a half joke after all. I'm trying to remember. Sharon or Cheryl or somebody will recall the headline last week, wasn't it, about social media apps will be able to be sued by parents whose kids are addicted. Yes,
Yes,
that
in
was the
I
Texas.
headline.
think
I,
it's a
I
while
do
ago.
remember that.
Yeah.
was it Texas?
Yes.
Right. So if TikTok, and by the way, it says in the last paragraph of this article, notably TikTok now says it's introducing these time restrictions for teens between 13 and 17. That's very interesting because uh, I'm sure according to their policies, you're not allowed to use it if you're under 13 anyways. So if you were using it under 13, that's on you and your parents. If you're and we're doing it up until 17 because once you're 18, we're no longer responsible legally for this new legislation that they're trying to pass in Texas. So, TikTok is specifically addressing the age range that would be impacted and relevant to potential lawsuits of addiction by preemptively providing tools for you to can manage your own addiction so that they
Isn't that
can.
wonderful that they spent 2 months with like maybe like four maybe 12 devs like QA testing this feature that goes against the entire premise of the platform existing, that they've had thousands of other coders and millions of content creators coming with excuses for look at me, spend time on this, spend time on this. Advertisers, look, they're spending all the time on this. Wow, isn't that wonderful? They spent 2 months on another feature to go slightly in the other direction. It's like the best like fig leaf, like ass covering, just like the most bare minimum to get that idea across. I mean, the entire platform's existence is predicated on the exact opposite concept.
Correct.
It's
Yeah.
also interesting to note how China compares to America in its response to social media problems. One is rule of law, where now you can sue people, and the other one is rule by law. We make it illegal for kids to use apps more than X hours a day. So,
And
Yeah.
please verify them all with facial identity, so anytime they're near any electronic device, the state can decide whether or not that person is allowed to use that. So, check their social credit score, check out if they're getting good grades in school, checking out if they've sung praises to the party recently. Any of those things fail, all the electronics around you essentially magically don't work the same. This is teaching long-term compliance patterns that go far beyond the individual apps.
And wasn't it in response to like the Texas lawyer or the suit, the law case? I don't remember exactly when they asked like what are the company policies to and practices to how to identify children's age or any illegal activity or any exploitation that children were receiving from their platform, and what company was doing to prevent that. So perhaps they are responding to such future lawsuits by developing these policies now because they see it's coming.
it's like that Chinese streamer who had his stream pulled because somebody showed up with Tank Man as a cake, and he didn't even know about it because he was born after that. So he somehow violated knowing about something that he couldn't have known about. because it was censored his whole life, but somehow he's still in violation of that and gets pulled from the stream. So
Now imagine if
interesting.
you have like withdrawal syndrome. You know, imagine you spend your entire life dopamine addicted to something and that's suddenly taken away from you. I mean, I can imagine essentially the dopamine disorder. What about the withdrawal symptoms? We could have a whole new class of medical diagnostics on this. And can you imagine
Mhm.
the insurance codes, the billing for this? I mean, I see lucrative $1 trillion opportunities right here. How many people were affected? Do you or no known loved one essentially suffer from dopamine disorder? Call the lawyer firm right now, and we're suing class action. It'll be like the asbestos all over again, except it's for our brains. It'll be great.
And all the ER data from the injuries received by those TikTok challenges dropping on your face while you're trying to climb up on somewhere, and or perhaps
Sure.
slapping your teacher, and oh, those ER visits, the data from there, just because you watch a video and you acted on it and did something directly relating TikTok as a culprit.
I want to make a little correction. Sorry, the Texas parents is the one that want to sue TikTok for the 10-year-old, daughter
Yeah.
passed away, and the
Mm.
one that can allow the parents to sue TikTok for the addiction of the children is California.
Oh, California.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's California. Yeah, and you can uh, get a 25,000 per violation.
Now, of interest, how what does this mean for smaller competitors? What's interesting is when you see like which measures get passed or which ones don't for tech regulation. Pay attention very closely to how this affects new entrants versus existing established players. Weirdly, if you actually have the ability to get sued class action for causing not being in compliance with essentially like user verification, or whether or not you have like some dopamine addiction or whatever thing that they invent in the future, how much in compliance would it cost a smaller actor that might compete with existing platforms? Because if they don't have the rich bank account to pay off those lawsuits or pay off those regulators, etc., all of a sudden you've now created a competitive moat, which actually weirdly actually entrenches the current pattern. So this is something where it's not about the individual issue in question, although it's a nice entry point. Look at how it affects the current people that have all the lobbying power and are spending more money than the oil industry on lobbying. We've seen essentially century worth of foreign policy and all these crazy wars and everything. Those are all the oil industry spending fortunes on this stuff. Can you imagine the idea of the tech companies spending more money than the oil industry? What kind of long-term consequences that has for society? We should really be paying a lot more closer attention to that sort of stuff, because not just the individual issues, it's what the long-term power interest essentially that we're concentrating create.
And also imagine insurance companies, just how they identify pre-existing conditions using these dopamine-driven injuries as a pre-existing condition to deny you health care because it's going to be a long-term issue.
Well, that's
That would be
evil.
everyone. We'd all lose it, I think, based on the hours of usage.
You seem to be irrational and incapable of making decisions because you scrolled too much in your early childhood. For that reason, you can't get your knee repaired. It's like I can just see the justifications. This is bullshit, but I can totally see it happening.
ESD, endless scrolling disorder.
I can just imagine. It's like it affects other conditions or the comorbidities.
Oh, physical inactivity because I was on my phone 24/7, and that's why I got a heart attack. So, oh,
Ah,
lied.
okay. I mean, and if we can make the tech companies liable for the heart attack things from essentially induced non-activity, I mean, there is what's weird about this, there is like an indirect, you can see the chain of logic. It's a terrible one, but it does kind of make sense. So just make them legally liable for the healthcare outcomes, and before you know it, the tech companies are now have the largest healthcare liability out of all of them.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
next
horrifying.
up is from the Washington Post. Despite Facebook's ban on gun sales, internal guidance at Facebook shows that users can break its rules 10 times before being banned, and down to 5 times if they call for violence. The company discloses little information about how it enforces its prohibition of firearm sales on the site, leaving its punishment system shrouded in secrecy. How dare they? You're supposed to tell me exactly how you make all your decisions about me using your company.
I mean, we either basically let them essentially continue in a regulatory bubble that allows them to do whatever they want from free speech stuff, and it's like that's fine. But the fact is, you got billions of people using a platform that does have immediate political implications. So, I mean, if they're not going to publish the rules for that, it's like, okay, the legal shields essentially aside, open for lawsuit territory. If they want to keep that, essentially, it has to have some level of essentially public accountability.
10 strikes and you're out. So Andy Stone, who, oh, my computer's freaking out. Hold on. Here we go. Andy Stone, who works at Facebook in the communications department, took to Twitter, ironically, to say that today's Washington Post story distorts Meta's approach to penalizing people who attempt to buy or sell guns on our platform. Not once, but at least 5 times. He says, context, we prohibit individuals from buying or selling firearms on our platform, and we remove this content when we identify it. Our policies are far more stringent than federal law. Distortion number 1. When we remove content, we penalize and apply strikes against the account that posted it. Although the Washington Post says the strike system is shrouded in secrecy, it's available right here in our Transparency Center.
But very quick, when they say the transparency center and this other stuff, this is the same. It sounds like they're using the same playbook that they used for Cambridge Analytica, and I think that with the congressional stuff and the things that happened afterwards, it revealed they were just lying. I mean, it's not even like the fact that they were like just going, "Oh, this is a thing." Like they were literally straight up lying about some significant components. I hear that language here. It makes me suspicious that essentially some of this stuff is not in good faith.
Distortion number 2, Andy Stone says, the more strikes an account accrues, the more severe the penalties get. The truth of the firearms policy, most people who violate the policy do it inadvertently, and 9 out of 10 people who violate don't get more than 2 strikes. Despite direct and escalated requests, the Post excluded key examples. Distortion number 3, there are instances where enforcement is one and done. The Post chose to mischaracterize how strikes work and other factors that lead to an account being removed from the platform at 1 strike, despite multiple attempts to set the record straight. Here is the publicly disclosed policy. You can read it in full for yourself at
You
transparency.
know what the really weird part about this is the administration. This is actually Bangladeshi and Philippines, like low wage click farm workers that are working at like $1 $2 an hour, training in AI that kind of works but not really. And so de facto, what this means is that gun sales for whether or not people are going to basically be following a social pattern is dictated by minimum wage workers in another country. Like this is going to lead some really weird long term patterns if we scale this up even further, not just for like gun sales, but to other classes of commerce where you're having to ask for permission from 2 or 3 people on the other side of the planet in order to do a thing domestically. That's going to get weird.
I know a few people who do have stores and other transactions of that sort, and they do operate through Facebook. They just do it around the guidelines. They're like, okay, we initiate the conversation on Facebook in a gun club or some sort of enthusiast group, and then the transaction is taken off of the platform. Very simple. So it's. I think the article misses the loophole.
I just posted the link to Facebook's policy on disabling accounts, and I just pinned it to the top of the room. And it's surprisingly simple and straightforward. It's 4 sentences, and it has in very big font says disabling accounts. Updated January 19th, 2022. It says, for most violations, if you continue to post content that goes against the Facebook community standards or Instagram community standards, despite repeated warnings and restrictions, Meta will disable your account. That's sentence number 1 of
It's
4.
only worth like $15 for them internally.
Right. Here it is. Sentence number 2 of 4. After 5 strikes, you may receive additional 30-day restrictions from creating content, or we may remove your account, depending on the severity and frequency of the violations. In some cases, a violation may be severe enough that we disable your account after 1 occurrence, and is the case as in the case of posting child sexual exploited content. Sentence number 3. We'll also disable some accounts as soon as we become aware of them, such as those of dangerous individuals, convicted sex offenders, accounts created to get around our restrictions, and in instances where people misrepresent their identity. Number 4, and lastly, if your Facebook or Instagram account has been disabled, you'll see a message saying that your account is disabled when you try to log in. We also let you know whether you can request another review if you believe we made a mistake. And So the Washington Post is trying to, at a moment when the America on both sides of the aisle, everybody is really trying to figure out what the hell are we going to do about guns and gun policies in America. And the
We're going
Washington
to elect some more Democrats for a second term. That's the most important thing. And why? And the moment they get a second term, the issue will disappear. I'm calling out publicly. The moment that Democrats get elected for a second term, you will not hear a blip about gun control again. It's purely being amplified for temporary political gain. And that's and I just call. And I don't really have a strong issue on gun rights for or against, but pay very close attention to who is pushing this and what will how the public conversation will emerge.
but
But we have to identify
I
it
want
is a
I,
huge problem.
I want to suggest briefly that the Washington Post is trying to smear Facebook, and I'm no fan of Facebook, but that the Washington Post sees an opportunity to attach a very heated issue of how are these kids getting guns, and they're trying to paint the picture that Facebook's enabling gun sales, which I don't think is the case. And
Reminds me of Roblox taking advantage of children developers. Most of that happens off platform.
well, my point is that Washington Post wants to try and paint Facebook as an enabler of illegal gun sales, and they're not really punishing people as they should, and Facebook is more than accessible on if the Washington Post reaches out, and they clearly were communicating in the back channels, as often is the case when you have high profile stories between mainstream media and big sources like Facebook. Facebook's going to make itself abundantly available to the journalist who's writing that story to try and make sure that they understand everything perfectly. And how Andy's responding back to, on through his Twitter thread and calling out the intentional misunderstandings, quote unquote, of the Washington Post and their reluctance to kind of set the record in the way that Facebook is claiming on their own website, which they have the link to, which they conclude their Twitter thread by saying, "Go ahead and read it for yourself. It's all right here." I it, the Washington Post needs to normally ideally, somebody would be able to say, for the record, or to kind of remove any conflicts of interest, they would say, you know, reveal any sort of conflicts of interest in advance. The problem is, Washington Post clearly has this long, never-ending vendetta and animosity towards Facebook, and but they yet are not able to concede that or reveal that at the beginning of their articles. And then these articles make perfect sense if you've been watching how the Washington Post deals with Facebook. This is no surprise at all. This is exactly what the Washington Post loves to do to Facebook any chance they get. So, but that's missed by people who are glancing through, scrolling through wherever on Twitter, and they come across this. Anyway, it's just
It's just a brief little thing. Whenever there's an article from a news publication criticizing a technology company, one of the things I've paid very close attention to is, do they have the technology company's trackers and share buttons on their website? And on Washington Post specifically, at least last year, when they have democracy dies in darkness and oh no, big tech is taking everything. By the way, share this on Twitter and Facebook and the other parts like that. What I find is interesting is, actually I just checked. They've apparently removed the old share buttons from Facebook on here. It's only Twitter on this. So they may some internal policies have shifted on this over the past year. I don't know when that shift occurred, but if you ever see that for like Verge or Vox or these other ones, pay close attention to that, because those buttons mean that they're actually financially on the hook for some of their criticisms. Which that if the article actually gets shared again, it's sometimes could be the opposite way you'd expect, because more inflammatory articles get shared more often. The journalist on the hook essentially gets more click throughs, and the advertisers give them a promotion, etc. But the reason why this is relevant is Washington Post might be actually taking a very specific approach for how they're doing their paywalls and the other things, so they might feel essentially in a different position. I'm not sure if it's actually going to be a visible one, but we will definitely see some aspects of that.
So, Tyler, this is Tom. Here's the funny part. Everybody here in the room knows, I do know quite a bit on the firearm side of the house. But the key thing is, most of the people I've seen that have been banned off of it are not selling firearms. What they're doing is they're selling training courses.
Oh,
And then from not looking at it, they'll see half of them are law enforcement only or military only, which is kind of interesting. And usually the people that are selling them are usually former military special operations or former SWAT team guys. So that's another piece I find interesting. The only thing I've seen for sale on Facebook is maybe holsters, and that's about it.
This is my point. Has anyone ever seen a gun for sale on Facebook?
Most people
How?
go to gunbroker.com.
Right. Oh, this is my point. Is the the endless propensity for big media to distort reality and take advantage of the average American's inability to balance threat. Meaning, most Americans have no fear of driving intoxicated, or have their threat analysis is way out of whack due to mainstream media, and they end up being told these XYZ is very dangerous and it's happening all the time and it's a real threat to you and your livelihood, and they get all bent out of shape. Meanwhile, these other things are far bigger threats that are never reported about. And so going in this particular instance, the Washington Post is trying to make out that gun sales on Facebook are happening all the time and Facebook's not doing anything about it, and yada, yada, yada. Does that hold true with anybody's experience? No. No one's ever seen a gun for sale on Facebook. More important, and by the way, I guarantee you that I haven't read that article, but I'm willing to bet dollars to donuts that they don't mention how many gun sales have occurred on Facebook, because they themselves might not even know, but they should if they want to. If that's the narrative they want to try and paint, that Facebook's enabling gun sales, shouldn't they have some kind of data, or present some kind of case with some kind of evidence to drive that narrative home, rather than just point to the fact that Facebook might not be as harsh on people who, as Facebook claims, kind of acts when it does happen, which I bet is incredibly rare. But when they do, they kind of doing it mistakenly, not knowing that that's an illegal thing to do, and they warn them, and probably doesn't happen again. But indeed, their policy is that he links to that, if you do things wrong, you have 10 chances, and in some cases 5, and in some cases 1. Well, and then Andy Stone gets up on Twitter and says, hey, in the case of gun sales, if we believe somebody's really acting in bad faith or whatever, we have no problem banning them after one and done, as he says in his Twitter thread. So what exactly is the Washington Post trying to do here? Well, they're trying to attach all the negativity and animosity and anxiety that's being drummed up around, this recent Texas school shooting to Facebook. They're their arch enemy, because they know that that'll resonate with politicians and force them to be quicker to regulate Facebook, because Facebook is actually the real problem. America's really trying to figure out why these school shootings keep happening. I mean, if I really want to go out on the edge here, at the core of every conversation in America right now is trying to figure out why do these things keep happening. And it's a debate, really. It's not a question. The debate is, why do these things keep happening? And there's two sides arguing this. And Washington Post is trying to insert into that debate the idea that Facebook might be partly responsible for why this keeps happening. Are you fucking kidding me?
The only thing Facebook could be blamed for is the mental instability it creates.
Right, okay, now that's far more logical. That's far more of a valid criticism, which is Facebook. And actually, it turns out that Discord, believe it or not, was much more an issue in this Texas case, because the Texas school shooter literally was on Discord, and there's something worth diving about. But you don't hear that from the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post.
Yeah, I was going to say, because the other thing that has happened before is like, who was it? Was it one of them on Twitch also? But Twitch is owned by Amazon, which is also Jeff Bezos with the New York Post.
But now you're getting into the real nitty gritty, which they don't want to discuss. Instead of drumming up and making guilty by association, Facebook's account policy of allowing 10 strikes and you're out, and that in some they're implying that applies to the gun sales as well. When Facebook's saying no, not really. We're happy to remove people after one strike and you're out on gun sales.
Yeah, it was the Buffalo one that was actually live streamed on Twitch.
Yeah, but it's the classic case of don't look here, look over there, blame someone else, and avoiding the main issue. That's the core of the problem. Because why? Because there are data points you can compare with hundreds of countries around the world where children do use all this social media. Are they facing the same problem with gun violence? No, absolutely not. So there is something that is shared, which is the social media is equally used everywhere. What is different?
I'm starting to imagine there's a small team of interns at the Washington Post who do nothing but try and consider how they can attach any bad news to Facebook. Like there's a school shooting. Okay. Hey guys, new assignment by Thursday. We need you to figure out how you can attach this school shooting to Facebook somehow. Because it's honestly that big of a stretch that, as the headline says, despite Facebook's ban on gun sales, what else do you want? They have a ban on gun sales on their platform. But that's not good enough. Despite their ban on gun sales, internal guidance shows users can break its rules 10 times before being banned. Yeah, well, that's their policy. It's a written policy. 10 strikes and you're out. It doesn't say for what, and then you're trying to imply that people are repeatedly selling guns even after being caught or whatever. You have no evidence of that. So why are you implying it? You present no evidence of the narrative you're trying to create. And that's the problem. That you have some weird agenda against the company who stole your ad money. We get that. Facebook killed your company monetarily, economically. We get that. Right? They had a better mousetrap than you. They have an ad network that works way better than your posting classifieds in your technology from the 1800s. We get that. But, stop trying to tarnish them with every bad situation that happens. It's really weird. They need to be called out for this kind of behavior, and that's why I'm calling them out for this behavior. It's just really it's a waste of everybody's time. Stop writing articles like that. So, by the way, I will be the first person to eat my fucking shoe if there's data that shows that Facebook is knowingly enabling gun sales. And if that was happening, I assure you, the Washington Post would be all over that, and they would present it. And if they did present it, I would be the first to say, "Holy shit, Facebook! You have a lot to answer for here." And the regulators should be all over your ass. So the next is from Decrypt. South Korea crypto exchanges called BitThumb and Upbit plan to delist Litecoin, saying that the token's new privacy features violate the country's anti-money laundering laws. Two major exchanges in South Korea said they will delist Litecoin due to the new privacy features enabled by the protocols. Right, well, that is a prelude, a foreshadowing of the much bigger question, which is not Litecoin, but Bitcoin, and how America feels. So South Korea doesn't like Litecoin. Okay, well, they're going to be very cut and dry about that, and goodbye. Right. Still, the big question is not Litecoin, but Bitcoin, and not Korea, but America. How the hell does America feel about Bitcoin? Everything else is foreplay to the main event. So this is purely a foreshadowing of the inevitable, the main event, which the question is, when will that happen? Maybe, could be later this year, probably sometime next year, where America is going to have to get very concrete about how it feels about Bitcoin specifically, and all crypto generally, but specifically Bitcoin. So the next one is from Bloomberg. It says that 54% of ApeCoin owners vote in favor of remaining on Ethereum after Yuga Labs floated creating its own blockchain after its huge metaverse land sale. The next is from TechCrunch. Amsterdam-based Backbase, which helps banks analyze data, raises 120 million euros. Wall Street Journal says documents show how Cerebral, I guess that's a company, used social media ads to grow its ADHD drug business as federal prosecutors look into possible Controlled Substance Act violations. So I guess drug companies are not supposed to be using social media to drum up business. Online mental health company surged to $4.8 billion valuation after it started dispensing ADHD medication and advertising online. I guess, yeah, I can understand why you shouldn't be able to do that. By the way, the rest of the world is still incredibly confused why Americans allow medical ads of any kind. That's not really allowed outside. It's very uncommon outside of the U.S., and it's rather bizarre for non-Americans who visit Americans and see TV ads for medications. It's really weird. You don't see that generally outside of the U.S. Like the late night Cialis commercials for, impotence or what have you. So, the next one, Ethereum's proof of stake merge upgrade goes live on, who cares? Frankly. Next is New York Times. Experts say the lack of publicly available data makes it difficult to verify claims by Tesla and others about the safety of their autonomous driving tech. Automakers and technology companies say they are making driving safer, but verifying these claims is difficult. Okay. Automakers and technology companies, they mean Tesla and Google and Amazon and the like, say that they're making driving safer. Yeah, they do. They say they've done X number of miles and it's resulted in Y number of collisions, and hence it's safer. Because the average, I assume, is well known with human drivers. And so the article starts by saying that every 3 months, Tesla publishes a safety report that provides the numbers of miles between crashes when drivers use the company's driver assistance program called Autopilot, and the number of miles between crashes when they do not. These figures always show the accidents are less frequent with Autopilot, a collection of technologies that can steer, brake, and accelerate Tesla's vehicles on its own, but the numbers are misleading, he says. Okay, great. So show me the evidence of that. No, not so fast. He doesn't have any evidence that these numbers are misleading. He's just trying to say that he doesn't believe Tesla's numbers, and he has no evidence of his own. Let's see. Do you have any evidence of your claim? You just put in black and white text in 17.5-point font that Tesla's numbers are misleading. He says Autopilot is used mainly for highway driving, which is generally twice as safe as driving on city streets, according to the Department of Transportation. Fewer crashes may occur with Autopilot merely because it is typically used in safer situations. Tesla has not provided data that would allow a comparison of Autopilot safety on the same kinds of roads. Neither have other car makers that offer similar systems. Autopilot that's implied in the data. Autopilot has been on public roads since 2015. Car makers and tech companies are adding more vehicle features that they claim improve safety, but it's difficult to verify these claims. Okay. I guess that's your, yeah, you have to take it on faith, yes. And so what about it? It's now the onus is on you to disprove it as a journalist. That's kind of your job. Yep, so your job is difficult to disprove some claims. Okay, that's unfortunate. Okay, I'm reading through the article and I don't see a punchline other than that claim repeated multiple times. There you go, New York Times. Well done. The next is from the Financial Times. In an email, ByteDance says that Joshua Ma, who leads UK's TikTok shop that we talked about yesterday, will step back during a probe into comments that he didn't believe in maternity leave. Yep, we read all about that yesterday. So now that guy has to step back. Yeah, makes sense. If you were with us yesterday, you can understand why. Um, the next, Sweden-based Juni, a neobank catering to e-commerce and online marketing, raises $206 million. Made up of 100 million in equity led by Mubadala, which is the sovereign wealth fund out of Abu Dhabi, which I believe our friend Faraz was part of. And I happen to know the people who are part of the round. My dear friends at EQT Ventures, who sponsor all of my events, are also part of this round. And what this is, this neobank catering to e-commerce and online marketing, is if you are an e-commerce company and you're selling, you're a platform, you're selling stuff, or you're a SaaS company and you're selling stuff, normally, traditionally, you would go to a VC and raise money in exchange for equity. And yet, as a SaaS company, you have subscribers. And you hopefully that number of subscribers is growing in a rather predictable way every month, every week. And so you can extrapolate out the data and make very accurate calculations and projections about how much money you're going to have in a year or two or three. So why give up equity when you could essentially really want a loan? Well, it's because traditional banks won't give you loans for these kinds of things. They're too high risk for their risk profile. So you're now seeing neobanks addressing that opportunity. And there's a bunch of them. And there was another one recently in Stockholm called ARK Capital with a K, doing essentially the same thing. There's now a whole bunch of these popping up all simultaneously because it's a huge opportunity, which is providing loans to startups based on data. And these are very clever systems. ARK Capital specifically, founded by my friend Henrik, who wrote the algorithms for Spotify. He went to work at EQT Ventures, wrote an AI for them to help them figure out who they should invest in, and then realized there was a much better opportunity, which was building an AI that could analyze input data to figure out who to give loans to. Again, a kind of a risk calculator. And what they do offer is if you are a startup, a SaaS startup with subscribers, you give us access to your data, your dashboards. You allow us to suck in the data from your systems, and we will do all the calculations, and we will offer you a loan so that you don't need to go give away valuable shares of your company to regular traditional VC investors, when what you really want is a loan, and we will give it to you. And normal banks will not. And I predicted these things would happen a year ago, when in the early days of tech news, when neobanks were still relatively novel. And I said, you're going to start to see neobanks for all kinds of demographics. You're going to see neobanks for SMBs. You're going to see neobanks for the black community, the queer community, the Muslim community, the left-handed short people community, all of it. All of it. Including SaaS company, neobanks targeting SaaS companies. Because of different wants and needs of each of these communities, and you're going to have separate neobanks that target each of these communities and their unique products and features and functions that speak to those demographics and users. So there you go, and this one is a very lucrative one. So Stockholm alone has had two in the past month that both raised about $200 million each. But it's not as big as it might seem, because the vast majority of that money is going to be used to give out to in the form of loans. So they're not using 200. It's not like a brand new unicorn that was built out of nothing. It's a bunch of money that they're raising to give out uh, as loans.
Hey Tyler, what's the
Yes.
so how will they be able to access deal flow? Because I mean, that's kind of the key here, right? That they're super good in sourcing those startups. That's uh, especially in these times. Um, do you have any information about on that, like how they're gonna be able to do that?
I think they're going to be able to find databases of SaaS companies, email addresses of founders, and proactively email them and say, "Hey, would you like a loan? It doesn't cost you anything to find out. Click this button, give us access to this data,
Yeah,
and we will let you know if you qualify for a loan." Which, by the way, the timing
I
for this couldn't be better because
I
raise.
haven't gotten that email yet,
Okay.
but I'm just wondering because it's gonna be. I mean, the CAC, or the customer acquisition cost,
Yep.
is gonna be quite high right now because a lot of startups are already getting swamped with some calls. I don't know. Just curious about that. How that's going to work out. That's going to be interesting to follow.
Well, most of these SaaS companies use a lot of the same services themselves to run their companies, right? Like they use Stripe or Chargeify to do their subscription payments, to manage their subscriptions, right? There's only a handful of companies that apps, for lack of a better word, that help you manage your subscriptions,
Yes,
right?
Stripe Atlas is very SaaS friendly, and they help the startup incorporate, right. And at the same time, they also, which is something that is very difficult to do, especially for overseas founders, to set up bank accounts either in Silicon Valley Bank or Mercury Bank. And for Mercury Bank, they actually link the founders to many VCs in their so-called, they actually allow them to do early and I mean seed and Series A fundraising through the Mercury Bank ecosystem, which link the startup founders to the VCs. And of course, with this information, they can also easily give out loans if they want.
Right, but
So
Stripe.
is this like Series A? This is like basically SaaS companies who are looking for like bridges between Series A, Series B, or like what's kind of
No,
the fork
well,
that they're
it
looking for?
it could. Yes, in some cases it'll be bridge loans between A's and B's, but in some cases it might even be enough that you don't need the A at all. I mean, depending on how many users you have and what your kind of what the customer value, how much money you're making from each customer. If that number is relatively high, then you might qualify for a very large loan, which might satisfy your need for even doing an A round or a B round.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's not seed or pre-seed, obviously, because they need the data, and that means there has to be some substantial traction or
Some kind of traction.
uh, yeah. Mm. Okay, cool, interesting. What's the name again of that company
That one's
or
called
these?
Juni, Juni,
Okay,
and the other one's called ARK, ARK Capital, ARKKAP, ARK Capital.
okay, cool. Thanks.
And the investors in both of them are both friends of mine, in both Juni and in Cap. And I almost invested in ARK myself. So, the next, yeah, was that? Did I hear Ken?
It's been born. I was going to ask Tyler, do you remember that Square bought Tidal, and that was going to be one of their entries into the creative sort of SaaS banking, sort of helping them promote themselves on Tidal, and maybe use the Square part to provide that financing. I don't know if that's progressed anywhere. Do you know if that's moved along
I have
to
not.
help
I've not.
artists, musicians?
I've not seen it yet. The version that we saw today was Apple making loans to just end users themselves. It's been revealed who's actually providing the loan and who's doing the risk calculation for the buy now pay later through Apple, which they announced in their keynote on Monday for iOS 16. And we now know that Apple is handling that themselves in house. That could turn into Apple making loans to app developers because Apple knows your app data. Especially if you're using, and this could get really interesting, if you're an app developer and you have an Apple app in the App Store and you're using Apple as your payments, which until relatively recently that was your only choice, was to use Apple. So Apple is getting their 30% cut of your sales, right? And now, literally right now in Korea, that's no longer true. You can use, you can charge the users directly or use some other provider other than Apple. Korea's made the decision at the government level that Apple cannot have their kind of monopoly as the exclusive payment enabler, and the Netherlands as well. And this is going to be decided in the US and elsewhere. And I assure you, the EU is going to follow along. So Apple might say, "Oh, well, here's a whole new reason why you might want to choose us, despite our 30% fees, to handle all of the payments from the users. Because if we have that data and we see how many sales you're having every day, and we see the growth of those sales, we can offer you a loan so that you could grow your company so that you don't need to go to investors. Would you like a loan from Apple Bank?" And that could be primarily automated. If somebody came in and wrote the algorithms for them to do the risk, calculations in the same, which is not so different. It's just on a bigger scale of what they're doing for these end users who are going to buy through Apple Pay. They're doing risk assessments on you to offer you buy now, pay later. Why not do risk assessments on these app developers who are, selling copies of their apps through the App Store, and they need capital to grow their companies? Great. Where are they going to get
So
that capital?
Tyler,
Yeah,
is this Apple's own money, or those groups of people who are investors? And forgot the name of the guy who have like the school to teach these kind of investors to develop a pool of money and then combining them together, all creating like a bank kind of thing, and
syndicate
then
is
loaning the
what you're
money.
describing.
Yes, syndicate. So, do you think Apple is contacting through a syndicate
No,
providing this money, or is Apple's own money?
what I'm proposing doesn't exist yet. What I'm suggesting is Apple could, what would be very, it was addressing Mabana's question around Tidal and Square when Square got their banking permits to issue loans, and the very next day, within 24 hours later, they purchased Tidal, which I said was not a coincidence on Twitter, and Jack liked my tweet where I suggested that. No, but to answer Mabana's question, we have not seen Square offer loans yet to artists on Tidal or anywhere else. That, but yeah, that should be happening relatively soon. Spotify or others, it's going to be the whole banking game is going to get very interesting as tech goes deeper into the issuing of loans.
Yeah, entitled to take your thought one step further with developers. Imagine you show up to WWDC this week and you walk out with a loan from Apple, right? So they have another touch point to get you, to get to know you as well if you're a really good developer
Right.
as well, right? So whether it's online or in person, that's another touch point where they can help you with your app and they can say, "Wow, you're really doing well. Here's a sneak peek in what you can do in the future," and then you get even more of a rocket ship there. So that's a really good advantage for them. If they can do that.
And also, aren't they trying to decentralize this banking process as well? So this is a way to decentralize and incorporate perhaps blockchain into this system of loaning.
They've given no indications of that at all. I think that's one bridge too far for where we're at in June 9th, 2022. Maybe down the road it could turn into that, but I have no reason to suspect that anytime soon.
Hmm.
So the next is that Google releases Android 13 beta number 3 for the Pixel phones that says Android 13 has reached platform stability, meaning the developer APIs and how apps perform are final. So it's kind of like the Android version of the Gold Master in Apple Land. As the beta reaches platform stability, Google would like to remind you that Android tablets aren't dead yet. And so here comes Android 13. And Palantir is preparing to bid on a 360 million British pound contract to underpin the UK's NHS operations to be awarded in November. Palantir employs 600 in the UK and plans to add another 250. Well, this is a kind of follow-up to the big brouhaha when people even realized that the NHS was subcontracted to Palantir to manage the data, and people freaked out because it was not disclosed to the taxpayers. Anywho,
Tyler, you know what's funny on that? What a lot
so
of people didn't know about Palantir from a healthcare perspective. One, they were giving it away during free for most of the hospitals and them to start using for COVID analysis. And then right before IBM dropped IBM Watson for health, they formed a partnership with Palantir. And that was all public knowledge. That was all out there in the news.
So the next is that from the Wall Street Journal, they say tech lobbying group CCIA and others, backed by Facebook, Google, and more, have spent $36.4 million on ads opposing antitrust bills that ban self-preferencing. Because that's the big new bill that they're working on. The legislation would block Amazon, Google, Facebook, and Apple from favoring their own products. Backers of the bill have spent less than 200,000. What does it say here? This massive new piece of legislation essentially would make it so that the big tech platforms couldn't preference themselves. So Amazon couldn't preference Amazon Basics when you're looking for, toilet paper or whatever. And so obviously Amazon doesn't like that. Similarly, Google wouldn't be allowed to preference Google Maps when you're trying to find a map for something. And so, of course, they're going to lobby very hard to try and stop that. And now the Wall Street Journal is saying that they know how much they've spent. They've poured at least $36.4 million into opposing the antitrust legislation. Okay, yeah. Yeah, of course. It's this thing called lobbying. People pay a lot of money to try and stop legislation that would work against their self-interest. So the next is Mexico City-based digital bank raises $70 million. Researchers say over 120,000 passports, driver licenses, and IDs of users of Chinese bike-sharing service was not encrypted and exposed online. And what else? A whole bunch of fundraisings as usual. Warehouse robotics and automation company Symbotic raises $725 million. Jesus, that's a big raise. A look at China's plans for the IPv6 internet protocol set to be presented at the UN's ITU conference in a bid to lure regions lagging in IPv6 adoption. And by the way, I've been to the UN's ITU conference in Geneva, and that was the most boring, dusty, crusty event I've ever been to in my life. I didn't know events could be that boring.
You
Although
haven't attended medical conferences, Tyler.
I would be happy to compare. This was the UN's ITU, which is the telecommunications summit. Dear God, that was frighteningly. I felt like I was in the 1975. Oh my God, that was unbelievable experience. It's kind of weird what happens at those events. Anyway, so yeah, China's trying to roll out internet protocols and wants to get people on board with their internet. Um, what else? A whole bunch of fundraisings as usual. Intel freezes all hires. The U.S. Secret Service ordered travel companies named Sabre and Travelport to spy on a Russian hacker for 2 years, providing weekly location reports.
Oh, related to hiring, Tyler, briefly, even despite of Elon Musk refusal to hire new people, China, I think, did hire in Tesla. It was a news.
Okay. So, but the interesting implication here is the revelation that the U.S. forces companies to spy on their behalf. So forget the fact that the U.S. was forcing these two travel companies to spy on a Russian hacker for 2 years. This is the only reason you're hearing about this is because this was somehow revealed. But the interesting point is the government can force companies to do things exactly like this, and they do it all the time. So, and it's not just the U.S., by the way. I mean, clearly China does this. Clearly, everyone's doing this all the time. So it's just something that most people aren't aware of. Although we talk about it quite often in this room. What else? Weekly NFT sales declined by about 70% from a high of nearly 1 million units. NFTs or bubble has essentially popped for the time being. Meta's head of infrastructure stepped down. Oh boy. Head of infrastructure steps down. Engineering and infrastructure VP will take over. Oh yeah. That's a pretty high profile role. Head of infrastructure stepping down just after the announcement of the COO, Sheryl Sandberg. So you're starting to see a bit of a trend there. That's enough high profile people leaving Facebook for the time being. I should hope for their sake that they don't have any other high profile people stepping down soon.
I'll be curious to know where they are going. Are they joining another company?
I'm sure it doesn't say yet. Meta faces 8 lawsuits this week that claim that its algorithms led to attempted suicide, eating disorders, sleeplessness, and other issues in young people. Users claim defective design, failure to warn of health issues. Company says it has improved supervision tools for parents. Yeah, exactly like the TikTok article we read an hour ago. Meta is now a leader in another social media trend, lawsuits claiming the company built algorithms in its platform that lure young people into destructive addiction. Oh, here we go. 8 complaints filed in courthouses across the U.S. over the last week alleged that excessive exposure to platforms including Facebook and Instagram has led to attempted or actual suicides, eating disorders, and sleeplessness, among other issues. Is somebody legitimately suing Facebook for their sleeplessness? I want to interview that person. Quote, these applications could have been designed to minimize potential harm, but instead a decision was made to aggressively addict adolescents in the name of corporate profits. Attorney Andy Birchfield, a principal at Besley Allen, the law firm that drafted the suits, said in a statement, oh, there it is. So this is somebody trying to craft up a class action suit. Have you lost sleep due to Facebook? Here comes.
Yes,
Yeah,
we
but
have.
I did at the initial days. I did lose sleep because of Clubhouse,
Well then, Cheryl,
but I adjusted myself.
you may qualify to participate in a class action lawsuit. Matt, you're trying to take
Really?
this? Yeah.
Okay, Paul is not listening now.
The the, the complaints add to a spurt of recent cases against Meta and Snapchat, including some filed by parents whose children took their own lives. The litigation follows a former Facebook employee's high-profile testimony in Congress that the company refused to take responsibility for harming the mental health of its users. I got news for you. I don't have any actual strong evidence or data to present, but something tells me that kids are a little more addicted to TikTok than to Facebook. And my source is the kids themselves, would be the first to tell you that.
Agreed.
Agree.
So, and by the way, TikTok today just announced new tools for kids in precisely the age range that could sue them for their addiction, 13 to 17. A Meta spokesperson declined to comment on the litigation, but noted that the company has developed tools for parents to keep track of their children's activity. Exactly, and now you know why TikTok announced those today as well, because this when this class action lawsuitism, when that fire hose gets pointed at TikTok, oh boy, is TikTok going to need as much defense as it can possibly drum up.
We discussed that in this room months ago.
Yeah, we did. In addition, the company is providing resources specific to eating disorders, making, by the way, it's well documented that the eating disorders happening with young kids is primarily happening on TikTok, not
Well,
Facebook,
I, I
where they,
think
yes, go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say, I think the observation, because this is data collected today that reflects something in the past. So I agree absolutely wholehearted with you, but I also think that at the time where the impacts were measured and felt was during kind of before TikTok had the adoption that it did. So yeah, I don't think kids on Facebook. My kids remind me of that daily. But they were for a period of time over the last 2 to 3 years, very, very much on Instagram. But today, yeah, it's all about TikTok. So it
The
depends
trend,
on when during the impact. Yeah, if you were to measure it today moving forward, absolutely TikTok. But looking back, I think it's probably a lot on Instagram. If there's a case to be had, I tend to believe that this is a bit of a red herring to the structural things that they want to go after Facebook for. Not this. This is sort of incidental, right? It's part of the thing, but it's not the tip of the sphere, in my humble opinion.
yeah, okay, but we sure as hell know why TikTok implemented their new parental controls today. And Apple iOS 16 introduces the ability to transfer an eSIM from another iPhone via Bluetooth while setting up cellular service. That's cool. Very cool indeed. So that covers the big boring headlines for today, doesn't it, Cheryl? Or is there a new one since we started? Not really. No, not really. No, that's the big boring headlines. So we've got tweets. Does anyone have a tweet that they saw since we met last time that they want to make sure we discuss today? No?
Did you did you see the brand new one on Ant Financial Ant Group?
No? What was it?
Okay, just put the refresh. I mean, refresh your list.
Uh-huh.
It's brand new.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I'll just read it. Sources from Bloomberg sources said Chinese regulators have begun early talks with Ant Group about reviving its IPO, a sign that China is dialing back its tech industry crackdown.
Yeah. Yeah. Bloomberg says they have sources that Chinese regulators have begun early talks with Ant Group about reviving its IPO. Yeah, because this has been so funny to watch, hasn't it? Like China, Ant Group was the first one that they cracked down on. The whole crackdown of China on tech started with the Ant Group IPO.
Yeah, but
And
at the same time, the South China Morning Post that said and group said no. The regulator said they had not had this talk with Ant Group. So you have these both side news
right,
again.
so South China Morning Post says that Ant Group China's security Ant Group. China's security regulators deny the fintech giant is reviving stalled IPO. The China Securities Regulatory Commission says in a one-sentence statement that it has not conducted any assessment or research in the matter. Discussions about a potential resumption of Ant's planned IPO, which was called off in late 2020, come as Beijing loosens its grip over the tech sector. But the Chinese Securities Regulatory Commission says it has not conducted an assessment or research in the matter. China security regulator deny the fintech giant is reviving stalled IPO.
But it's more likely because because of the zero uh,
Oh, here.
COVID policy. Yeah, so they might try to release some uh, this kind of information to test how this market or the public react to that. And in the end, yeah, and still has a positive future there.
So Ant itself denied it was working towards reviving its IPO. Quote, under the guidance of regulators, we are focused on steadily moving forward with our rectification work and do not have any plans to initiate an IPO, the company said in a statement Thursday, denying Bloomberg's claims of their quote-unquote sources. But it's very interesting because now we've come full circle where China had a very robust, just incredible tech ecosystem that is now on life support. And due to their beating the living pulp out of them, where a lot of the founders resigned to pick up a new hobby of finger painting and leaving a generation of future entrepreneurs thinking of other plans or moving elsewhere. And it all started with the Ant Financial IPO, which I told you as it was happening, the real reason it was happening was that because the government needed to control the Ant Financial's main app, which is the WeChat Pay, or Alipay, the other big financial app in China. And I said, way long before it was ever obvious to anybody that the real reason they're cracking down on this is because they need to control it because they're going to have their central bank digital currency and they're going to force that app to use their central bank digital currency. And here we are. And that's exactly what happened. And now that it's happened, by all means, go. Oh, did you want to IPO? Is that what you wanted to do? I'm so sorry. Why don't you go ahead and do that IPO now that we've done what we needed to make sure it got done. So, Nicholas, now that you're just joining us, Bloomberg says they have sources that Chinese regulators have begun early talks with Ant Group to revive the IPO of Alipay, now that they've thoroughly embedded their Chinese digital currency into Alipay.
Yeah, it's all shaping up that way. Actually, I was just at the session with the chairman of the CFTC and a former commissioner, and it was interesting to hear their reflections. It's absolutely clear, as we have been saying for the last year, that this is the way that the market is going to shape. It's going to be an Eastern, a Western, and then there will be a truly decentralized, because everyone is embracing. They had a show of hands at the event how many people had been to consensus before, given that the last consensus was held 3 years ago, and almost everyone was new, like they'd never been to one before. And so you can see the emerging pattern, like live as you're here. Just 22,000 people have just descended, and the old days it used to be full of hippies with long hair and ponytails and shamanic rituals and everything, and now it's short back and sides and very corporate. So the world is evolving, and the Chinese world will evolve to be centrally controlled, and the Western world will be controlled by the regulators and business people. But I still think there's a role for the decentralized world. But this is what's happening definitively. It is happening.
No, no, but Nicholas, I think the question more narrowly, are they really going to do an IPO? And the question is IPO to who or to whom, whatever the correct English is on that. Um, because given what happened with Chinese stocks in the United States, and it's not just that they pulled this deal originally. You have Didi, you have the Chinese ed companies, you have the split, the East West split that makes investing in certain countries that are out of favor with the United States risky for people in the United States and for the UK. If you're, in a Western country, are you going to buy an IPO of a company that may come under sanctions or something? So, I mean, you'd be talking about maybe them IPOing in Hong Kong and kind of almost like just not a real international IPO, but maybe the people in China and Hong Kong and a few other countries might participate. It's not going to be the same type of IPOs we've seen before.
Yeah,
I would
I
think
agree.
that.
It doesn't look like it will be listed on the New York Stock Exchange. It looks like it'll be a local listing, if at all,
Yeah,
from what they
Shanghai.
can see.
Further says Shanghai, but yeah, possible Shanghai and Hong Kong. That's the only two places possible.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. They can't risk foreign investors, you know, meddling in what they need to make sure their central bank digital currency stays in that app and that they can maintain control of that app and the data within that app and everything
No,
else.
but Tyler, my point is, foreign investors probably won't even buy it. They would consider it too risky. They
Yeah,
don't
I
have to. They don't
agree
have
with that too.
to. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see if they actually create some form of token that you can trade within the WeChat application or some other application. That would be a smart way to go. If I was the Chinese, I would be finding ways to get around the international trading capabilities of exchanges. I think that would be very difficult to stop. That's what I would do if I was them.
Okay. Other tweets that we need to get into today. A new plasma ignition system can improve fuel combustion by 20%. A small change in the ignition system can make internal combustion engines more efficient. So just retweeting that one if you're into combustion engines or plasma ignition systems. And thank you to Thomas Tong for that one. And then Heyman shared one a few minutes ago that we briefly mentioned yesterday, that departing Amazon executive Dave Clark to head logistics startup Flexport. The former Amazon consumer chief will take over as CEO of freight forwarding and customs brokerage startup Flexport, which is quite an important startup, which I hesitate to even call it a startup. Um, what else do we have? Google and Facebook payments to UK publishers could hit £170 million. The UK's largest news publishers could be in line for payments of 170 million British pounds per year if the UK passes legislation forcing Google and Facebook to pay for publishers for having their content on their platforms.
How are they not paying now? I mean, I realize every country is different, but I mean, these things. I mean, if you're a publisher, you're the Guardian or the New York Times or whoever. I mean, that's your proprietary work. So where does Facebook and Google get the right to just lift it and put it on their platforms anyway? I mean,
They're,
I'm surprised.
not, their users are doing that.
Oh, the user, and they don't want to go after the user. So this is not going to be like the music industry. Okay, I got it. That's why the users are doing it. Got it. Yeah.
So, is it illegal for a user to do that, to share that article? Well, by the way, you put a link on your article encouraging me to share it on Facebook.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, okay, did right. No, I was thinking, Tyler, you remember back when in the early days of the internet with Napster and the music industry, you couldn't the users couldn't share anything. And at one point the RIAA, the music industry lobby went after a bunch of kids. No, but I didn't think of that. That in fact, yeah, they're putting they're putting the thing to share it on their on so they want people to share it. I mean,
Well,
but yeah, but if they're doing that, then I think it kind of takes away from, hey, we're entitled to money. So now they've managed to get legislatures, I guess, to say, hey, we're going to put a link allowing people to to just take our content over to Facebook, and by the way, then we want Facebook to pay for it. I mean, that's pretty, it's pretty
Really,
aggressive.
like a trap, right?
if it's about a new upcoming UK law would oblige the platforms to negotiate cash for content deals with the BBC and other broadcasters. Using the Australian payment disclosures as a guide, they estimate that 10 of the UK's largest newspapers could expect to sign contracts worth up to 172 million British pounds per year overall with Google and Facebook. Well, why not Twitter?
I was going to mention the Australian thing, and one thing that you haven't mentioned yet, and I haven't seen the article, what happened in Australia, and there was actually a court case relating to these issues, but there was also a situation where that they held that if let's say someone takes something from CNN, and CNN was actually involved with it. You take something from CNN and you put it on Facebook, and then there are comments, user comments, Facebook users comment on the article, and they say something that is derogatory or defamatory. They didn't want to hold Facebook liable. They wanted to hold CNN liable. So CNN made the decision they will no longer distribute their material on Facebook. Okay. So if they completely follow the Australian model, I'd like to see what happens in those situations where this content is kind of repurposed on these platforms, and then you have the Facebook users or the Google users or whatever service you're talking about, Twitter, whatever, and they're putting up comments and they say something defamatory. Who you're going to sue? Because in Australia, apparently, you're suing wherever the content actually emanated from, even though it's not their platform, and that's why CNN pulled its content off those platforms. So it'll be interesting to see how closely they follow Australia.
Indeed. And by the way, that fiasco was the first story that gave birth to tech news around the world. And that was being debated in my friend Jeremiah's room. And we had the Australian journalists on stage groping and griping and lamenting about how Facebook is, taking their bread and butter and giving it away for free. And in the audience was some key people from Facebook who worked in the media department, who then jumped up on stage, and it was one of the most interesting exchanges I've ever seen in my life, let alone in a clubhouse room. And that's when I thought, holy shit, this is the absolute future, when you get both parties that are part of this story that we're reading in the room, and you can hear both parts of the argument being vocalized by the parties themselves. Holy cow! That's the holy grail. That's the opportunity for this format to be able to do this. So,
Alan, my other question, I'm sure you're curious also,
yeah,
is are they going to have to only make payments to these publishers if there's no paywall? Because sometimes, as you know, they'll give you this thing. You can send a link. We know it's some of the ones we're talking about. In fact, we just had it the other day with the Washington Post. You couldn't read the article. Somebody sent a link. I was able to read it because I actually have a legitimate subscription to the Washington Post.
right.
But if you don't have that, then should Facebook have to pay the Washington Post if its readers can't even read the article because there's a paywall, or they're going to have to take off the paywall because they're getting money? I don't, I mean, I've been just thinking about this out loud.
Well, by the way, what about the fact that many of those publishers run ads, right? Whose ad network do you think they're using? Very often it's Google's. So why is Google? They're already making money from Google when people come to their website and see the Google ad network that they're running on their site. So Google's already paying them billions of dollars a year for the traffic they're already getting, which in many cases Google is sending them. Anyway, so the next tweet that I have is from Saudamini that a self-charging battery generates electricity from moisture in the air. A new self-charging battery can harvest enough energy from moisture to power small electronic devices. And I'm retweeting that for those who want to see that. That sounds very, very cool. And maybe this next one is related in a kind of ironic way. The next one says that the UAE explores new tech for rain enhancement. The National Center for Meteorology holds a workshop to see potential of new studies in rainfall. And that's how you know when you're screwed. When you're getting all hands on deck together to think about how you can get moisture out of the air. Enough with the video games, enough with the metaverse. That's nice. Can I drink it? Because I can go decades without the metaverse. I can go days without food. I can go hours without this thing called water. So how about we start thinking, and by the way, we're running out of it.
And even less with air, without air.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, fortunately, we have enough air to breathe still. It's the water that's...
Air contamination.
Yeah, but still, you can still breathe it and survive on it. You won't survive as long, and that's a very valid point. I don't mean to belittle it, but there's parts of the world that aren't going to have enough water to survive. And the UAE is high on that list. And so the UAE is exploring new tech for rain enhancement. Exactly right.
I also saw some news yesterday about the water desalination plants and how that may be able to solve the problem. Not sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it solves the problem for people who have incredibly cheap sources of energy, like the Middle East. So the next is a U.S. drone maker aims to protect people there and in Ukraine. Blake Resnick was a 17-year-old growing up in Las Vegas when a gunman firing from a strip hotel window killed 60 people. I remember that one. And so here's another example of people thinking about using drones to stop, mass shooters in the U.S. Because we saw one last week or earlier this week. Somebody can remind me who it was. It was Taser, the company who makes the tasers, was going to put tasers onto consumer drones to be used at schools during mass shootings to ostensibly crash into the gunman, for lack of a better word, and tase that son of a bitch with a drone, because it's kind of difficult to do with your hand because he has a gun, but you
But
could.
Tyler, you're still gonna even with that situation. And obviously, I live in Vegas, so I'm familiar with that particular one. You always have an issue of like speed to the target. I mean, these things happen so quick. If you don't have drones that are equipped to do that kind of at the ready, if you're I mean, with the damage that a gunman can do just in 10 minutes or 15 minutes, I mean, I'm not sure that solves a lot.
I
I
think it
mean, it,
does. Let me explain. I have DJI's FPV drone. FPV means first person view. It means you put on goggles and you fly in like VR, but the goggles connect to the camera on the front of the drone. So I fly the drone and I feel like I'm flying like I'm goddamn Superman, right? Zooming all over the place. And I can go up to 10 kilometers with this thing, right? And the battery lasts realistically about 22 minutes, right? Now, and I can swap out the battery in 2 seconds. So, if police departments also had FPV drones, and by the way, this thing flies at up to like 70 miles per hour. Like if I crashed into somebody, I don't even need the taser on the thing. I can take somebody out with this thing easily. So, but you could add the taser, you could add pepper spray, whatever you want on it. That would be trivial to do, the pepper spray, by the way. That could be very interesting as well. So, if you have FPV drone pilots, which are that is actually relatively easy to train, by the way. Anybody at a police department could become an FPV pilot. They could get an FPV drone. They could use that in their arsenal in the episodes of police shooters. Here's why. Because when a school shooting happens or a public shooting like the one in Las Vegas happens, a phone call obviously goes to 911. That's America's emergency phone number. And the 911 operator calls the police, and the dispatch goes out to everybody. There's a shooting going on at location XYZ. So, my point is, I can get an FPV drone to that scene way faster than a police cruiser can get there, even on a rocket fueled motorcycle. So, if an FPV drone is launched from whatever in any city, it could be there way faster. That's the fastest way to respond in an emergency like that, right?
Okay,
Where
just to be clear on the
yeah,
timeline,
yes,
the whole shooting was about 11 minutes, and the only
fine,
reason it ended is when eventually the cops were there.
yes,
The shooter decided to kill himself.
right,
Okay, but before, so you had 11 minutes. So I don't know where you're sending the drone from.
yes.
Okay, I mean, so okay.
The center of the city. So even a city the size of Chicago, right? It, Current technology that the current DJI FPV drone can go 10 kilometers. If I'm parked in the center of the city and I have a 10-kilometer radius, so a 20-kilometer diameter, that's most cities, central cities. So if the police department is conveniently located, again, assuming, and generally this is true, that you'll have a police department in the center of the city, you're working with a 10-kilometer radius, 20-kilometer diameter. That's generally most cities. And you release that thing, dispatch it to where it needs to go. You could get there within a couple of minutes, probably faster than most police cruisers, and get into, more importantly, instead of having the whole current scenario where the police, establish a perimeter outside the school and try to control everyone going in and out, et cetera, and then try and get somebody inside, figure out where the guy is. I think if you had a highly competent drone pilot with a taser and or pepper spray on the drone, could get into that person far faster than the police, especially once from the perimeter of the school area, because it's just a matter of seconds for the drone to reach there, and it could take a minute or two or three for a policeman with a gun to get in there.
And this guy's firing from a broken hotel window 32 floors up, and
Right.
you're going to tell me you're going to okay.
Are you telling me you're going to get to that 32nd floor faster than a
No,
fucking
I'm not saying.
drone?
I'm just saying I'm not
But
sure.
he can shoot the drone
That's
as
not the.
well, right? He has this semi-auto auto guns there.
Right.
So
Well, he
he can
barricaded himself
drone
into the
as well.
hotel room. How are you telling me you have a better solution than a drone to get in through that window?
Tyler, isn't that like
Through the
scenes?
window. That's interesting. Okay, you're going to send the drone right into the window. Okay,
Okay.
you're not going to try to shoot him. Okay, got it. That makes sense. Okay.
It isn't that like the scenes? What was that show? There was like three movies like 20 years ago with the whatever cop, and he was with the like Iron Man. My mind, I can't remember it. It was a pretty
RoboCop?
RoboCop. Yeah, that's a scene out of RoboCop. They had armed drones in that, as I recall. Um, my point, I think you're spot on in terms of effectiveness. Using that in schools is kind of the head scratcher. I think it's because we've been on a slippery slope of the militarization of our police force, and just kind of what's happening in schools is just kind of a further catalyst, and this whole debate about arming teachers and all that. I think the whole point of this opportunity is to just take a big breath, take a step back, and really look at different ways to solve the problem, not just the mental health, because that's a whole other issue.
That's
But
not where he was going, David. We didn't want to get into the whole gun control issue.
yeah, well, I mean,
Very,
somebody
it was
said
very narrow.
the use case was to go onto a school. right? I think as a law enforcement technique, there's some promise there. Um, but just I thought part of the context was school, and then it gets to, like, is it a defensive thing that the police department has at their disposal, or disposal? That's something that is kind of intriguing, especially with what happened in Vegas, like you're saying. But the thing about schools is just it's a whole kind of different enchilada, I would say, and anything kind of ramping up militarization and hardening of as compounds, that's that's a walk towards insanity, quite frankly.
Yeah, but at least the drones don't won't be afraid like the cops were in Florida and in
Exactly.
Texas.
So one remedy for that is, I think, the cowards like that, let's just call it for what it is. I think you need to look at pensions and access to pensions. I think there needs to be some behavioral there needs to be some means to kind of hold you accountable for what you do. In medicine they have malpractice. In law enforcement, there's got to be some
Well,
way
well, by the way, David, the cop in Florida is already under indictment, but the kids are still dead. I think to your point though, he was near retirement. It's probably, and no one, the police union is not going to want to hear it. But do you really want to have cops who are 1 year away from retirement, guarding anything where they may have to put their lives on the line? I mean,
Yes, you do, because it's your job. If you can't handle what the job entails, you're earning a retirement because of the role you play at your job. So the answer to that is clearly yes, right? That's my point, is to have some teeth on if you're going to step into law enforcement, which is awesome. It's great for society and all that, but we need to really
realistically,
tighten
you
up.
can't run a police department like that because as you know, because very well, that pensions are basically for the entire length of your service, and you may have done a great job for the first 20, 25 years, and you're just going to run into the situation as they get closer, and you're really on top of it. They're going to want to probably, logically maybe take less risk, and if you're going to, you have to also have people who are willing to do the job. So you can't make it so onerous that nobody wants the job. Okay. So all I'm saying, it may be better to have some, younger cops who are a little bit more adventurous, in some of the
Well,
more
I
situations.
want to raise a point. What point in their job training were these human beings trained to deal with this kind of scenario where there are young children involved with guns, which can put extra added pressure on a human mind? It's a different scenario when there are clear criminals and adults, and you have that mindset, oh, this is like a person who is stealing something or have shot at somebody, and as an adult you react differently, but you're surrounded by hundreds of children. What kind of pressure this human being is under? Was this person, this cop, trained for that? What kind of psychological support or mental exercises he was given to deal with this kind of scenario? Because I can tell you, when I was rotating in the pediatric oncology ward, my emotional reaction was completely different. Even when I went to the burn ward, hearing to those screaming, I was able to tolerate it. But I went to the pediatric ward, seeing those children, it's not the same. So my question is, it's easy to blame the cop, and I'm not for cop or against cop or something. I'm just discussing the human aspect, that are we training human beings enough for these kind of scenario, because this is something relatively new, and I don't think there are any programs training these human beings to handle with this kind of situation. And on the other hand, I do go for drones because they don't have this emotional reaction, and the precision and all of the problems that we are facing. Maybe the drones are the solution. I'm just trying to present this scenario. Why? Because I've seen it over and over again. I've worked with people in armed forces, and I know that most of them want to do their job nicely, but the reaction they receive affect them, and the surrounding affects them, because they are, after all, human beings. So training is very important.
So, but in these situations, the two that I'm referring to, the one in Texas, the one that happened in Florida, the cops were not. It wasn't an issue with the kids because they weren't even near the kids. Unfortunately, they refused to, break through the doors. So they were concerned about themselves getting shot because look, I mean, honestly, because the shooters are so well armed and they've got, they're wearing bulletproof vests. The shooters are, and they've got armor piercing bullets. I mean, it is a very dangerous situation for the cops. That's primarily what they're scared about. But you've raised an interesting issue now, by the way. Okay, and I don't know the answer to this, but with a human being, and I'm not saying that there's not a rule for drones. It's pretty interesting. But when a cop is confronting a situation, let's say with a child, where he's actually facing the shooter and children, or a shooter and any hostage, they're able to see whether the hostages are in any danger. Does the shooter have a gun at the head of a kid? Okay, they can tell because they're there. Okay, what's going to happen with a drone? And you send a drone and you give the drone a longitude and a latitude and you say fire. But meanwhile, the shooter got his arm around the kid. Is the drone going to be able to distinguish between the
Great,
shooter and the kid he's holding? I don't know.
Well, wouldn't
great
they have like a
question.
live video feed or something?
Yes, they, of course. Look at the video pinned at the top of the room and tell me that those guys couldn't take out the person in that scenario.
And look at the video, and the drone can keep on flying. It doesn't have to shoot right away or do anything right away. It can take its time.
Look at the video I just pinned to the top of the room and tell me, if your child was being held by a gunman, would you feel comfortable having the people in the video I just pinned to the room fly the drone into the scenario, and do you think they would have the skills to competently take out the threat to your child? It's a very simple question and a very simple answer if you watch the video.
I mean, just by the data that these kids or young adults or even older adults, the dexterity they have. Okay, so I can relate it to how in the surgery department, we had those GI related robotic system, and I was very good at it. You know why? Because I played video games. So my thumb and all the dexterity was needed was so good that the precision was there. And there are so many surgeons who are good at that just because they have played video games. So I have no doubt that these kids who have been playing for so long would be able to control the drone with precision. Because if people can do microsurgery, looking through like a microscopic instrument and nanometers, like very thin needles and slicing, this is like a gross picture. They can perform even better.
Aaron, aren't the patients usually under general anesthetic, so they're not moving? We're in a situation with a live gunman and a hostage. I mean, the gunman could be moving back and forth with the hostage in different directions.
Yes, can, but at the same time, these kids play video game where all their targets are moving and they still get them.
Watch the video. I'm surprised it hasn't been attempted yet in a school shooter situation.
Honestly, like in the Texas, the shooter, in the end, he shoot himself. Also, I think in when he planned all this, he already decided he kills himself in at some point. So, sending any kind of weapons like these drones with either tasers or any other things to stop him might irritate him more and killed more. So I'm not sure if you
No,
have. It's not 100% thing to save more. That's my point because
no, but
he might
the,
get much more.
the way that we handle this in the United States, except we didn't actually execute on it, is based on what happened in Columbine. They don't try to wait the shooter out. They don't try to talk him out with a SWAT team. They basically the procedure is supposed to go in and get the shooter and eliminate the shooter as fast as possible because they're no longer making the assumption that if you don't put pressure on the shooter that he'll kill less. Okay, and that's been true since Columbine. What happened though in Texas? What happened in the Florida school shooting? The cops froze, and they didn't try to
Yeah,
intercede with.
react in time. They
Okay,
were
so
in the
so the
delay. They were
SLP is
slow.
that so any collateral damage along that is not a cop's responsibility. That's your point.
Yeah, because this is their training. Their training is based on what happened in Columbine. Is they're expecting this. This is not like a hostage situation where someone's asking for ransom. That's a different. If if you're thinking about like I'll talk about an old movie, Dog Day Afternoon with Al Pacino, based on a real story. They robbed the bank, and then their idea was to basically just get away with the money, and then someone triggered an alarm, so then they took hostages. That's a hostage situation, and that maybe you can negotiate your way out of. But when you've got a mass shooter who's there to kill people, that's the only intent why that shooter is there. They now learned is that the shooter is going to kill people. There's no negotiation. You need to eliminate the shooter. You need to eliminate the threat as soon as possible. So they're not worried about aggravating the shooter. Okay,
Okay, I got it.
And
Got it.
I'm
Thank you.
thinking instead of, or maybe in addition to pepper spray, how about having a web-like thing that is dropped off on the shooter, some sort of tying device that can grab the shooter and just tie him up, or disable him from shooting further, and with the presence of the video
How
that.
about banning guns?
I heard an English accent.
I don't know. I just think that this is, it gets a little bit crazy. I posted to the back channel a good article about UAVs and the drone capabilities and and the limitations. But I think you just need to look at the military use case. And if you look at the recent deal between the Germans and the Israelis for the Heron armed drone, I think you can see the direction of travel. I think the other thing to bear in mind is with the advancement in drone technologies in a military context, you see the fact that it cuts both ways because the bad guys also get hold of these. So imagine being subjected to a drone attacker, which makes air-to-air interception much more difficult, even for drones. So be careful what you wish for. Is my basic thought.
Yeah, before long you'll have drone attack. Yeah, exactly right. Instead of uh, guns in schools, you'll have drone attacks in schools.
And it's more likely that you'll get some tech-friendly weirdo that will basically I mean, we've seen it already. That will just, you could even drop flechettes. I mean, it's quite actually a good article that you posted to the room. But in the beginning, in the 1800s, it says very clearly that they used balloons, and what people could do is drop darts. You could just have a bag of darts that you take up. I don't want to give anyone ideas, but you take up with a DJI over a large crowd, and you just look up the word flechette, and you just drop the flechettes. It would just drill holes in everyone below. I don't mean to frighten you, but if you really have got murderous intents, that's what you would do, and it's really not complicated.
Well, this is all prelude and foreplay to when it becomes relatively easy to engineer, um, biological agents, and it's getting easier by the day. So, what if
I
the
mean, until we find the solution, isn't it easier to train the cops, considering these psychologically draining situations that put extra stress on them? I don't see any efforts to train these people to prepare them to face such scenarios.
I don't know if that hasn't happened. Aaron, we're 20 or 30 years from Columbine. There's been massive amount of training on school shootings. I mean, massive. Now, maybe they haven't taken into account some of the issues that you're talking about. I don't know. It also, but there's massive training for law enforcement to deal with school shootings since Columbine. And this is like for 20, 30 years now, whenever that was.
We have a number of very rational solutions to the complexity of the problem. What we don't have is is Congress taking their responsibility, right? That's part of the problem. That's not part of the problem. That's the root. If you're looking at symptom and problem, the problem is the power of the gun lobby. So I mean that's if we but we have solutions. We have a myriad of solutions about assault rifles, about we should be licensing gun ownership. Full stop. There's no rational means to argue that point at all. I mean, it's a weapon in some use cases. Let's there's also hunting. There's different self-defense. So we really need to kind of do a dive on each one of those and kind of refine a solution around all of it. I mean, there's in Vegas, and Ken, you can speak to this. I think in Vegas, or is that cars? I think, isn't there like a weapon like a weapon park where they have a bunch of different types of weapons, and you can just go shooting. You can shoot all these different types of weapons without having to buy it. And
That's in Vegas. Yeah, we have that in Vegas.
yeah,
But
yeah.
David,
So
I think going back to what Tyler put up that article. What I mean, when he didn't want to get into like all these issues, I think he was basically saying, given the status quo, that we haven't solved the problem all the ways that you're suggesting. That if you have an active shooter, can a drone? I mean, this is really the more narrow, right? Can you use a drone to take out an active shooter? So I was a little skeptical, but now I'm less skeptical. But I was skeptical because he brought up the Mandalay situation. I was skeptical that and it was at night also, by the way, not that from maybe it doesn't matter that much, but at night someone breaks out a 30th or 32nd, whatever floor this guy was on. It was in 30-second floor window at Mandalay Bay, and he's firing down on um, uh, basically an open field across the street. I mean, it was an open plot where they were doing the concert, and it only took him 11 minutes to kill all those people. Okay, that you're going to be able to get a drone up there, and hit the target, within 11 minutes, because at minute 12 he had killed himself. Okay, so I mean, so that was really the issue, and maybe he could. Look, I have friends. I mean, you're not going to like to hear this, David. I had friends who were there. I mean, who survived. I mean, this is where it is. But both of them were ex-military and very well trained in weapons. And they said, if they had the right weapon, they think they could have, taken this guy out from the ground. So, which surprised me, but they both said that. Okay,
that
I
doesn't
mean,
surprise me. No, I mean that's a self defense use case. That
no,
you know
no, no,
that
no, no. I wasn't making a political argument. I was surprised that they could even hit the shot, because I'm thinking like you're on the ground and this thing's 32 floors up in Mandalay Bay, and you're going to hit the target who's coming from. I mean, but they said they could do it. So I mean, it's a very difficult. I mean, because Vegas, you know what I'm talking about. That's You're in a really difficult position when someone's shooting out of a hotel window across the street, 30 something floors up. I mean, trying to do something from a distance. And what happened is the cops, and they fired one of the cops, by the way, who was one of the first cops there, who admitted when they did the investigation. Look, I feel bad for the guy. I mean, I wouldn't have had the courage. I mean, that's why I'm not a cop. But he said he basically froze. He was worried if he burst through the door that he's basically going, he's going to be killed. And their procedure basically is you get several cops bursting through the door. Maybe the gunman takes out the first cop or something, because but at some point there's enough cops behind him that they'll get to the gunman and stop the shooting. That's the theory behind what they're supposed to do. It didn't happen in Mandalay Bay. It didn't happen in Texas. And so Tyler's basically saying, we had a drone, you know, this is where it is. And so that was and that was the articles and stuff that he's been pinning up. I mean, I don't, he didn't put up an article on the Second Amendment. So, okay. Well,
So next tweet I have is from Saud Amini that a self-driving. I want to share it with the room so that you can see this iron ride, because this is a good. I have a personal story on this one. Oh, that's weird. When you open the story, it doesn't show the device. The link on Twitter shows the vehicle called Iron Ride. A self-driving truck will soon deliver goods to 34 locations around Texas. A California-based autonomous trucking company will begin making deliveries to 34 Sam's Club's locations around Dallas in July. Well, it's not a California-based autonomous trucking company. It's a Sweden-based company called Iron Ride. I happen to know the founders. They happened to pitch at my event when they were just getting started, and it happened to be one of the worst pitches in the history of my 10-year event. Because the team behind this self-driving semi-truck are engineers And the pitch was so bad that I asked the guy, "You must be like the head of development, like the CTO, like chief technical officer. You're not the marketing guy, right?" And he says, "No, I'm the chief marketing officer." And the audience, was laughing uncontrollably because the pitch was really incredibly geeky. But nonetheless, it's a very impressive company. And they're in the news today that they're going to, starting next month, they'll be making deliveries with their autonomous vehicles in America. They've been making deliveries in Sweden for years now, and now they're going to be on the road in the U.S. again. By the way, 34 Sam's Clubs. Sam Clubs for non-Americans. Think of, I don't. This is hard to describe to non-Americans what a Sam's Club is. It's the size of a soccer field, I guess, is the closest. To give you scale to how large Sam's Clubs are, imagine a supermarket the size of a soccer stadium. And now you have an idea of what a Sam's Club is. They're incredibly huge. There's nothing like them in Europe. So here's what's interesting about this is Uber just did a deal yesterday with a competitor to Ride, which is Google's Waymo. So now you have two autonomous trucking companies going on. And then today you had the Teamsters Union warning of the truck drivers, the human drivers, going on strike for doing food deliveries. And then yesterday and today we have Ride doing food deliveries to Sam's Club. So autonomous trucks are booming, human drivers are striking. Keep those dots in mind and watch how these connect down the road. No pun intended. But I would love you to see the Ride vehicle. It's gorgeous. If I pin it to the top of the room, will it show it? I don't think it does. No, it doesn't. Okay. So the next story is from Saudamini that scientists craft living human skin for robots. From action heroes to villainous assassins, biohybrid robots made of both living and artificial materials have been at the center of many sci-fi fantasies, and now it's a reality. As scientists craft living human skin for robots. I can imagine all kinds of interesting side effects of this. Just wait until your AI-driven virtual companion has an actual physical living human skin body. You think the birth rate is declining now? Wait until you have a superhuman intelligent AI as a companion or as a child. It's coming. Guarantee it. There's no question about it. What happens to the birth rate when you no longer have to bother with Tinder? Because there's far better options down at your local computer store. What's going to happen? The next is from Katerina. Stark changes in brain structure for people with anorexia. The brains of those with anorexia have sizable reductions in three critical measures, including cortical thickness, subcortical volume, and cortical surface. Very interesting. I'm pretty sure the flesh-skinned robots don't have anorexia, or the emotional disorders or the brain disorders connected to anorexia. So the next one is from CNBC. It says, goodbye gasoline cars. EU lawmakers vote to ban sales of gasoline vehicles after 2035. So we only have 12 years left of gasoline-powered vehicles in Europe. As the legislation takes the EU a step closer to its goal of cutting emissions from new passenger cars and light commercial vehicles Also, not just passenger cars, also light commercial vehicles. Okay. And the next is from David Craze. Are robots the answer to inventory challenges? It says, as e-commerce companies grow, brands like Skims and Uniqlo, one of the world's largest retailers, are hiring fleets of robots to help them sew, pack, and deliver goods. Gee, I wonder why. Is this the future of what? So yeah, this is, it's very clear where how these dots connect looking forward. Is this the future of fashion fulfillment? Gee, I wonder. Yeah, of course. H&M, Uniqlo, Zara, all of them will be fully automated from the factory all the way to your door. There's not much question about that. It's a question of when, not if. And at the looking at the amounts of money that the companies who are providing these solutions are receiving from investors, it's going to happen much sooner than later. Especially when the Teamsters make an announcement today that the human truck drivers are going to go on strike at a time when there's food shortages. Something tells me the automated solutions are going to fill in those gaps. It's going to force, just like when we had COVID and we couldn't meet in person and we went to technical solutions like Zoom to have our meetings, the technical solutions are going to find a way, the problem solvers are going to find a way to solve those problems. So the next is an AI trained on 4chan's most hateful board has been set loose, and the hyper-racist bot has posted 15,000 times in one day. A YouTube creator trained an AI on 4chan's most hate-filled board, and it was exactly as vile as you imagined. And it was able to post 15,000 times a day. And then Katerina has one from Science Tech Daily. It says, having more than 2 children can cause cognitive decline. Well, what about having robotic flesh-skinned children who know more about every topic than you do, even parenting? What happens when you have a robotic flesh-skinned child who knows everything every expert could possibly ever know about parenting? Will people have children when the robotic children are have a far better what's the words I'm looking for? At some point, the robotic children will potentially outscore human children in delivering happiness to parents
You
because they will
mean
be
digital children in the metaverse?
no, I mean robotic children with flesh skinned skin,
Ah,
the human skin, or both. I think we read the article yesterday about the VR children. That's going to happen real soon, if it's not already happening. So you'll have a child in the metaverse first, and then just due to the time that it takes for the technology to become to manifest, but eventually you'll have flesh-skinned robot android children that are physical manifestations out of the metaverse, but based on the same AIs powering the kind of quote unquote cognitive abilities of the brain, quote unquote. Anywho, the next is, what are you breathing? Air quality checks are to be available on Google Maps. Google is debuting its new air quality layer in the US on Android and iOS. Will it be available in India? People in India want to know. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's incredibly cool for people to see that because it impacts your lifespan. And the next one's from BB from CNET about sleepwalking, the strange phenomena researchers don't fully understand. Researchers are still trying to understand what gets people out of their beds without any memory the next morning. It's 2022. We're going into the metaverse, and we still don't know why sleepwalking happens. And Telegram reportedly surrendered user data to authorities despite insisting that they don't. To this day, we've disclosed 0 bytes of user data to third parties, including governments. But it's being reported that they have. And Tesla goes ahead with China hiring event after Elon Musk job warning. Tesla plans to hold the event online in Shanghai and will recruit staff for smart manufacturing roles. Okay. And Saudamini has one that NASA will launch rockets from Australia's commercial facility. And the first, NASA is set to launch rockets from a facility outside of the U.S. In Australia for the first time. So there we go. And there was a whole lot of other tweets today that I was not able to get to. Did anyone have one that they shared that they want to make sure that we get to? That I didn't get to? Now's your chance. Okay. Well, then we will. Oh, this is a great one. I'm glad I caught it at the very end. Here it is. Here's the last one for today. Microplastics discovered in freshly fallen snow in the Antarctic for the first time. Tiny particles of plastic, fragments of everyday items, have previously been found in sea ice and water, and even in human blood. The last place on Earth that it hasn't been found was thought to be the Arctic, until today, when microplastics were discovered in freshly fallen snow in Antarctic for the first time. Tiny particles of plastic, but had never before been uncovered in fresh snowfall in the Antarctic, but now it has. So you can now be assured that microplastics are literally everywhere, because it has now reached the last frontier in freshly fallen snow in the Antarctic. Concentration was even higher than it had been reported in the surrounding Antarctic sea ice. More than a dozen different types of plastic were found, with the most common being PET, which is used to make drink bottles. At a time when colleagues were optimistic that they wouldn't find any microplastics in such a pristine and remote location. Once back in the lab, it became obvious there was plastic particles in every sample from the remote sites on the ice shelf, and that the findings would be of global significance. We collected snow samples from 19 sites across the Ross Islands. Looking back now, I'm not at all surprised. From the studies published in the last few years, we've learned that everywhere we look for airborne microplastics, we find them. This is potentially a canary coal mine scenario, as it's not at all understood what the effects of these microplastics are. I'm by no means optimistic. It's going to take time to know what the full ramifications of all of this microplastics and everything that we do. It's already assumed that it has to do with lowering sperm counts, for example, which would result in declining birth rates, for example. It might have something to do with the booms, all kinds of interesting abnormalities in social trends that are hard to account for, like autism or who knows what. So, very, very worrying. We're literally swimming in plastics. Something to add to the declining water of real problems worth focusing on rather than more video games. Just something to think about, and will be the focus of my September event in Stockholm, all about impact, about solving real problems. So ping me if you're interested in that. And other than that, happy Friday once again. Oh no, tomorrow's Friday. Sorry,
Tomorrow.
it's already tomorrow in Asia. So
For me,
happy
it's
Friday,
Friday,
happy
yes.
Friday from Asia, and happy Thursday everywhere else. So have a happy rest of your Thursday, and we will see you tomorrow when you catch up to us in Asia on Friday, and we'll do it again tomorrow. So
Thank
thank
you,
you.
everyone.
See you.